Is it special meeting of redevelopment and housing authority? So,
Yes,
council
this would be-
redevelopment and housing? Okay.
So can we have a roll call for council, please?
Council members Manukian,
Here.
Jarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Friedman.
Here.
Roll call for redevelopment?
Agency members Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Manukian.
Here.
Do we need a roll call for the housing? Roll call for the housing authority.
Authority members Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Mency.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Quintero.
Here.
Thank you. Can we hear your report? It's already in the record?
No,
Okay, that's what I just asked for. That's okay.
it's a report.
I asked if we could hear the report.
All right. Director of Administrative Services, Finance regarding budget study session, community development, including the redevelopment agency and housing authority.
Thank you. Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the Council, Agency, and Housing Authority. You did such a good job in getting through the Wildan study and the balance of community services that now we have the afternoon for community development. And the staff has prepared a great deal of information for you this afternoon. We'll be going through the redevelopment agency budget, the housing budget, and the balance of the community development department's budget, general fund, and special funds. With that, let me turn to Hassan Aghani, the director.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, the Redevelopment Agency, and the Housing Authority. If we go to the first slide, we have been listening to the presentation of the Community Services and Parks Department, and based on what we've heard, we hope to have created, we will be able to answer some of your questions, but I'm sure we will be getting more questions, which we'll be happy to answer. The basis for the information that's included in this presentation are your questions regarding the level of detail that you've asked, funding sources and expenditures, and the department's work program components, regardless of the funding sources, and the staffing structure. Today's presentation will cover the following areas. We will have a mission statement for the department, the origins of and organization of the current Community Development Department, and what we have in common between the different divisions in our department and some of the differences that actually have us design the work program in particular ways. We will give you a funding summary and the proposed fiscal year 2011-12 budget, and we'll also cover some areas of funding sources because we have several different funding sources, and then the full-time equivalents of our staff. In addition to that, we'll have part-time hourly staffing structures that we'll be presenting to you. Because you have asked to combine the general fund and non-general fund parts of the department together, we're going to separate out parts of, according to the funding sources, the presentation of the department. We're going to do an overview and past reductions on the planning, building and safety, and the portion of neighborhood services that are general funded. And then we're going to give you the proposed fiscal year 2011 and 2012 budget with some performance measures for every division. And then we will give you the program function and listing of the different programs for every division and the staff's and service level impacts that will be resulted should you adopt the budget reductions that we are proposing. We will be also giving you a presentation on the other funds, redevelopment, economic development, and housing funding. In addition to these, there will be a portion that is funding the neighborhood services division's activities. For those, we're going to focus on the core services and the proposed budget, and then the performance measures. A lot of activity has been taking place this year that really require us to give you very customized presentation of the redevelopment agency and the housing authorities programs. At the end, we'll have a conclusion, and then we'll have several occasions for you to give comments and ask questions. The division heads will be giving you presentations of each segment. We thought that would be the best organized way to present you the materials, and then while you are welcome to interrupt us if you have something about every individual slide, it would also be very helpful if you could hold for each segment at the end to give us some questions if that's what you wish. Next slide, please. The current Community Development Department's mission statement is really the broad statement for the whole department, which is through ongoing dialogue with all segments of the community, the department captures the community's vision for its future quality of life and translates it into a well-coordinated, internally consistent, streamlined work program according to the missions of the city, the redevelopment agency, and the housing authority. There have been some questions about the genesis of the different parts of the department. This shows you the background. I'm sorry. This shows you the background of what gave rise.
Quite a comprehensive mission statement. I'd like to comment you.
Thank you.
And it was not a run-on sentence as far as I could see.
Thank you very much.
Got an A on grammar.
We appreciate that. So what you see in today's community development is really, the genesis of it is coming from 4 different departments in the past. What was the planning department in the past is now the planning division. The building and safety segment of the public, what was previously part of the public works work program, is now part of the community development department. And then what was previously community development and housing, which included neighborhood services and housing, is now our 2 different divisions part of this department. And of course, we used to have the Development Services Department, which included redevelopment, economic development, and what we have added today as part of the work program, which is policy and innovation. We will be going over every one of these divisions' work programs. This is the very, very broad summary of our department. This reflects the summary of what you see on this org chart. It's a relatively flat department with several different divisions that really their work is totally interrelated. However, they have their separate functions, and that will be the basis of our different divisions. This is the org chart that has always been on our city's website. As the department has developed, we have updated this org chart. And that org chart is the same as what you see here. Here we have the faces of the employees, and that really helps us as a management tool. What we don't have on the website is the faces of the employees, because a lot of them work for the city and they have private lives, and we don't want them to be stopped for Section 8 housing questions if they're shopping groceries.
If it's fair for us, it's fair for them. We get stopped all the time.
We can have a conversation about the various bargaining unit negotiations about when they get off of work. Next slide, please. There are several things that our divisions have in common, and we wanted to highlight those. Every division in this department has various local, state, and federal legal requirements that we need to abide by. So there's limited flexibility in what we can do, because a lot of our work program is dictated from various levels of law. And every division has a direct customer service or constituency support component. We have a very face-to-face type of a service with different constituency levels. And then each division has its own set of very well-identified constituents who are in communication with us on a regular basis. And the different divisions have functions that completely overlap with every division has functions that overlap with every other division, and that really is why it makes sense to have all these divisions under one department. And every problem in every division requires that we look at the work program of all the different divisions to really address the problem, because the work is so interrelated. We cannot address a problem without really addressing the work program of all the different divisions. And so every time we solve a problem, say in planning, we have to rely on how it impacts building and safety and neighborhood services, and how that might impact redevelopment and economic development activities. We have both measurable and non-measurable goals. A lot of our goals are quality of life related goals that we will address, but we can't always address them in terms of counting things, and we'll cover some of that material as we go through the presentation. And here's where our division's work programs vary. While we have those similarity, we have different funding sources that some of them have restrictions, and based on the restrictions we have to organize our work program accordingly. And then while we have programs that are fee funded or partially funded by fees, we also work with grants and subsidies from other funding sources. Some parts of our work program has revenue-generating potential, and today you got a presentation this morning about how that revenue-generating potential could be tapped into to increase some of the revenues. And then we have levels of local flexibility and constraints. For example, while in the Building and Safety Division, the building code really is dictated at the state level, and most of what we implement at the Building and Safety Division is already dictated at that level. There's some level of smaller level of flexibility that the local government can take on, and that's very different than the Planning Division, where most of what we do is defined according to local zoning laws, and you have greater flexibility in terms of what you would like to do. So these are some of the differences that will be also reflected in our presentation today. These are the various funding sources. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about each one of them on this slide, because each division head will get further into them as we go forward. So obviously we have the general fund component, and we have fundraising, particularly in neighborhood services, to provide funding for a portion of what they do. The redevelopment area, the redevelopment agency has central project area, San Fernando Road corridor project area, and county tax sharing funding sources, which is restricted, and as well as bond proceeds, which Mr. Lanzafame will get into later. The housing division has housing assistance, which is primarily Section 8, and home funds and redevelopment set-aside monies. And then, of course, a portion of our budget comes from CDBG, primarily for code compliance, and the special project and limited term grants that we sometimes have that we have to implement a particular way. This is a list of the fundings. Again, I will not get into them because we'll get further into these details when we get to each division's presentation. This is, in a nutshell, our department's budget this year and next year. What I'd like to emphasize on this is that while you might take a look at, for example, 2010-11's overall department budget to be a bit over $80 million, and for next year's is over $101 million, that's a really number that's misleading, and what I need to emphasize about
Why
that...
are you putting misleading numbers up
Well, it's
there?
misleading because we're mixing non-general fund and general fund functions, and people automatically think everything is staffing and services. And I'd like to just give you more information so that it won't be misinterpreted as opposed to misleading. I used the wrong word. I apologize. So about less than a quarter of these figures reflect the salaries and benefits. And the increase in the general fund, which is the yellow portion on the top, is reflecting really the benefits and PERS increases. That's the only thing it reflects. And the agency funding increases, it reflects CIP projects, which will be detailed later in the presentation, and the housing section will also, both the agency and the housing authority funding and budgeting purpose discussions have been under a lot of discussion this year because of what's happening at the federal and state levels, which we'll get into in greater detail in a little bit. But the general fund portion is fairly straightforward. In order to do our department's share of participating in the budget cuts to contribute to the budget reductions that you will have to make at the end of the budget presentations, we are proposing general fund budget reductions that are a bit over $177,000. The reason for that is that we have already cut a lot of the essential functions programs in the department in previous years, and as you'll see, we have really very little discretionary programs that we can cut, and we're actually proposing cutting into our priority programs.
What was the total budget for parks? For general fund? Do you remember?
For parks?
For parks, the presentation we had this morning.
Yes, I can tell you here.
There have been some questions regarding the breakdown of management and professional and
Could you wait
technical...
till I resolve this?
Sorry?
Can you hold on a second?
Community services and parks budget.
15 million, right?
13,465,000 less the reduction that's been proposed would be a net budget of 12,117,000. That's the general fund. That was the general fund budget. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, and they're proposing cuts of 1.3.
$1,350,000.
So there have been some questions regarding the breakdown of staff. We have, because of the restrictions on the funding sources that we use for staffing, we didn't think for the accounting purposes and what we put in the books, it would be well-serving our tracking system to put the way that we are funding some of our staff under the work program. So we have two ways that we refer to the staffing and the way we fund them. The org chart, which is our work program, shows how the different positions are distributed in the department. However, there are positions, for example, in the planning division, Mr. Alan Loomis's position, who is the principal urban designer, his position is part paid by the redevelopment agency because he's the urban designer for the redevelopment agency, but another part of it is funded by the general fund because he also oversees the work program of the design studio and the design review process in the planning division. Therefore, part of his salary is reflected the way that we do trace the accounting system. It's reflected in the redevelopment agency's funding, but if you look at where he's located in the org chart, he is under the planning division because that's where his title exists. I hope between the two pieces of information, you'll be able to track the positions, and if necessary, we'll be able to answer some questions to explain these. Just to say a little bit more, there are also a few positions in our department that are funded by non-general fund sources that are not necessarily even redevelopment agency sources. For example, we have a mobility planner position that's funded by transit funds, which is generated from the Public Works Department. However, that position is located in the Planning Division and works in conjunction to work on interdepartmental work program on transportation-related issues. So in terms of the breakdown of managers and professional and technical service people, if you look at the org chart, you will see and you will meet all of the division heads. These are the managers of the department. The division heads are the main managers of the department. Each division head runs a whole work program for that division. And what we call managers, professional and technical people as well, might include highly technical work, for example, the work of the planners and some of our analysts who, many of them have master's degrees and they have to do independent, complicated work. And for our purpose, they are under the GMA classification. But really, for our budgetary purpose, what that means is that we can ask them to work up to 60, 70 hours a week without any overtime. And you will notice that there's no overtime paid to the managers in our department, but their work is really demanding and complicated. So that's the breakdown of our department staffing. Overall, between the different, the hourly and non-hourly staffing, we have just around 150 employees in our department. Now, the next set of presentations will focus only on the general fund portion of the budget. Tim Foy will be giving you an overview of the planning division, and then Stuart Tom will talk about building and safety division, and then Sam Engel will speak about neighborhood services division. Up to this point, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Yes.
On one of the earlier slides, we talked about funding coming from the bonds.
Yes.
Are you telling us that that's a certainty that those bonds proceeds will not be grabbed from Sacramento? Because we seem to have been felt that, we sold the bonds, we're in the clear, but what would stop them from saying, thank you, you sold bonds, so give us $10 million each year, or whatever your bond proceeds were going to be? And is it therefore a safe course to just fold that into our budget? Because so much of our assumptions are based on the fact that those bonds are going to be sold and we'll get the proceeds and we'll be able to maintain the level of staffing that we have.
Here's to me that Mr. Starbert is getting ready to answer this question. I will tell you that we will be giving you details about those challenges as well.
I'm much more pessimistic about this whole redevelopment agency grab. I know, nothing has happened, and the CRA is getting some legislation forward, and it's getting stalled back and forth. But I really think that there's going to be some impact to us, and I want to know how whether that's even on our radar screen at this point.
Let me try and describe it this way, and you can turn to agency counsel to to give you more of the legal opinion, but every legal person I've heard from has indicated the safest way to protect your tax increment is through bonding. Now, if the state were to say, as they did in the ERAF shift the last 2 years or 3 years, just give us your money, we think that's illegal, and they'll lose that fight. And even their own alleged counsel, I think, believes they'll lose that fight. Every legal scholar I've heard on the subject will tell you that the best way to protect it is through an enforceable contract. Your bonds are that. Your various development agreements are that. The last opinion I had from the general counsel of the CRA was the farther down the road you get with those contracts in place, the less ability the state has to come in and somehow mess with them. To say that we're optimistic about the future redevelopment, I don't think any of us are saying that. It does seem, however, that as time goes on, the governor's proposal has less and less momentum, but I think he is still actively pursuing his agenda, which is the elimination of redevelopment, so we certainly can't rest. There was a recent, I think, ledge council opinion coming out saying that they believe the governor's proposal is illegal. So again, as more people look at this and more time goes by, his plan seems less and less, has less and less possibility of success. That doesn't mean, though, that the state won't do something even though it's illegal. They've done it before. They've used numerous measures to plug a hole in their budget that they knew was either wouldn't produce the revenues they thought or was illegal. I think we have several layers of protection. One is, as much as we can, have either projects and or future tax increment committed through enforceable contracts. We've done that with the bond issue. We've done that with various development agreements. Second layer of protection is the loan between the city and the redevelopment agency, which we have met at least every precaution that you can to ensure that that is viewed as an enforceable contract and a true debt from the agency to the city. And then you have also authorized the repayment of that debt. To say the state may have some means to try and pierce through that and still take your money. They control the property tax revenues. They control the sales tax revenues, two of the largest revenue sources to both the redevelopment agency and the general fund. So I guess it's conceivable they could take an action to say, we disagree with what you've done, so we're going to take your money from some other source. But from that will ensue some very large lawsuits, not just by Glendale, but by others. So I think you have taken the steps necessary to protect our funds as much as they can be protected. I'm comfortable encouraging you, frankly, to program those funds, because then you can tell the state and our representatives what happens if indeed they come down and try to take local resources. I think that's been a mistake that us and others made with the last two ERAF shifts, is frankly we were preparing ourselves for that, setting the money aside, and indeed when they took it, what could we tell them was the impact from that? Not to mention we hadn't protected it through a bond issue. So I think we are as protected as we can be, but the state's desperate, although their economic numbers turned up positive, and they expect to turn up more positive. In fact, the likelihood is if the numbers continue, they'll see some significant increases in their resources projected for next year. That all bodes very well, because then I think some of the pressure is off for them to come grab our funds. But that's to say that the motivation of the governor is all fiscal. I don't think it is. I think it's also driven politically, which is a payback to local agencies for the success of Proposition 22 and for other measures that or other positions the cities have taken on legislation like that would have shifted more review to the state for bankruptcy, municipal bankruptcies. And cities opposed that, and that frankly brought the ire of the State Firefighters Association, who has been one of the key proponents of elimination of redevelopment. A lot of that is just viewed as being payback. So part of this is fiscal and part of this is political. But I'm as comfortable, I think, as you can be that the resources and the steps we've taken to protect our resources, we've done as much as we possibly can. And I would encourage you to program the money.
Madam Chair, if I could add, the legislation and legal counsel and bond counsel have all acknowledged that a bond issue would be an enforceable obligation. So the tax increment that we would need to service that debt would be, at least by the legislation that's been proposed, protected. Where Mr. Starbird had talked about perhaps they come and take some of those proceeds, the way that we would budget them out is if you have a project, we'd spend them right away. If there are proceeds, we're not committing any long-term programs to those proceeds. So if it did get taken, we would certainly have a lawsuit to try and get it back, but it wouldn't damage our ongoing operations.
I would also like to mention, as we did this morning, that in terms of the full-time equivalents, slide number 13, I would like to see a breakout of management and professional technical
We'll be
staff
happy to do that.
in that slide.
We'll get you that. We just hadn't had time to adjust.
I know. I'm just.
Be happy to do that. If I go to the next slide, just before I hand it to the division heads, this is really our general fund picture in one slide. I would like to point out that the overtime that you see under proposed budget 2011-12, the $80,000 overtime, that all of that is attributed to the overtime that will take place in the Building and Safety Division, and all of that will be recouped through related fees that have to do with special services that the Building and Safety Division will be providing. Other than that, there is no other overtime.
What services?
These are building expedited plan check services primarily that people can pay 2.5 times the regular price to get expedited plan check review, and they pay for that, and that same money will go towards overtime for staff to give that service. Other than that, you will. This all reflects again the proposed reductions of $177,000. We'll get into the details of where that comes from. A portion of that comes from planning, and a portion of that comes from neighborhood services. Tim Foy, would you please?
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the Council. This is the Planning Division as we divided into its core functions. The first is current planning, and this is where historically has been the Planning Department's greatest public face to the community. It involves case processing, all the design review cases that the planners handle, all the conditional use permits, the variances, administrative exceptions, any of the dozen or 15 kinds of permits that we have. We also staff the public counter at the Permit Services Center. Most of our staff does work the public counter, and for those people, it probably involves a full third of their time in between their shifts at the counter and answering phone calls and being available for follow-up for the people who come during their shifts. The comprehensive planning section does code studies and general plan updates. I think as Mr. Hagani previously mentioned, these are in response to initiatives by the council or by community members, and there's a significant amount that is also just handed to us by state mandate. That is also true for general plan updates. A good portion of that is also mandated by the state. Examples of these code studies that result in ordinances would include solar power studies that we had over the last couple of years, artificial turf, rezoning of Hollister Terrace, the wireless facilities ordinance, which planning staff had spent a lot of time working with city attorneys on, the green building standards that Mr. Tom brought recently, but the planning staff was also heavily involved in reviewing it and setting up all of the public outreach that we did on that, rezoning of South Brand Plan. The general plan updates are things such as the housing elements, the North Glendale Community Plan, because our land use element hasn't been updated since the 70s, and things from the state as well, greenhouse gas initiatives, climate action plans that we're required to do and incorporate in our general plan. The urban design section is...
How many general plan updates have you had last year?
We have done work on the greenhouse gas and the climate action plan, and we also are concluding the North Glendale plan and taking it out to public review starting in this month.
Aren't the code studies part of the general plan update as well?
There's two separate programs, and what we're doing right now, what we changed about 2 years ago, was that we came up with a new model that will hit several birds with one stone. So, for example, in the North Glendale plan, we were asked to look at the design guidelines for the neighborhoods and for Foothill Boulevard. Also, we were asked to revisit the zoning for Foothill Boulevard. We were also asked to update the land use element for that. We combine all of those in the North Glendale plan, and we have all those products come in one team's work that focuses on all aspects and brings in several different products. So yes, all of those things were asked to be done, but we focus one team of people who work on with the community and produce several different products at the same time.
How many members of a team?
Of the team?
Yeah,
Of
10,
the planning
20, 30?
team? I can show you. It's primarily what we have in the on the org chart. The blue section is the planning division. So the part that gets involved in this are the 3 staff members who are responsible for writing the new codes and updating the existing code, and this portion of the team that's responsible for all the general plan and policy updates. So these two combine, and also members of the urban design team participate in that on the side, because they will need to implement them at the design review board process. So what we do, we create teams of several members of different sections of the division to work on the various products while we have the community in one room and discussing all aspects together.
How long did it take to, is that complete?
It's we have completed the draft. We have reviewed the draft with the community and gotten their final comments. I think we're going to bring it to you within by fall. So we're about done. Let me also emphasize that although
Next year, you mean?
no, the 2011, this fall. I must say that.
How long did you work on it?
How long? About a year and a half, I believe, we've worked on it. Let me explain one more thing. Today, Will Dan said that we have an aggressive code update and general plan program with compared to other cities. What he didn't mention is that other cities typically do this kind of program by hiring consultants. And I can tell you, a city of 145,000 people that I was discussing this with their community development director recently, spent $4.5 million updating the general plan over 3 years. That's $1.5 million done by a consultant, that required at least 4 of their staff members' participation. We do all of that in-house, and which is consistent with the practices that this community expects, and we know how that'll fall, and we'll be the ones to update them. On the zoning code updates, what again doesn't show up in other cities' planning department's budget is often done. The zoning code updates are done usually by the city attorneys or attorneys that the city attorney's offices hire at a very high cost to do the zoning code updates. I worked in a city like that before, and I know that would be very costly. In here, they're done by planners who are working and implementing the same codes.
Do we have a cost as to what it cost us to have in-house planners?
Yeah, we can give you the breakdown of the cost of the number of staff. I must say, though, that the way that the work program is done, the same people who, for example, write the code are also responsible for helping the members of the public at the counter, or also at times or serving as hearing officers. That way they can see how the code works in implementation. That way their experience with implementation informs the way that they update the code. So I can give you the breakdown, but in the breakdown we'll tell you that not 100% of every one of staff members is dedicated to code update, because they also do other things in the department.
And that's actually true for the people who do case processing. We try as much as we can to have them help out when they can on long-range planning projects, just so everyone has a full experience and can give the best quality service to our residents when they ask questions.
Speak into the mic, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, certainly. Urban design, we have 4 members in this section. They staff the design review boards and do design review for agency and housing authority projects. They also, as we have a couple of architects among them, they also function as doing design review for other city departments. They've helped out a lot with libraries. They've helped GWP They've had some influence, especially through historic preservation with some of the park projects. And even with Public Works, our mobility planner is part of this, and he's worked a lot on some of the Public Works projects. They are producing the design guidelines that Mr. Hagani mentioned, and for North Glendale, as well as ones that apply generally, such as the window guidelines that we have discussed numerous times at City Council here. Of course, there's a historic preservation program that is done through this section, and as we mentioned, the mobility planner.
When your architects provide services to the other department, are they logged and allocated?
No, we don't.
Departments for their costs?
We don't build other departments. No.
How much of their work is for other departments? Half, quarter, 75% of their work?
As mentioned earlier, Alan Loomis is partially funded out of the redevelopment agency. Of the people who are funded purely out of the general plan, it's maybe a fifth of their time. I wouldn't say any more than
20%?
that. Yeah, at the most.
And the cost is not allocated to the other departments?
The budgets are directly separated.
Okay.
It's not cost allocated.
So did Will then identify these items as costs that should be allocated?
In particular, I don't know.
I don't believe that particular
No?
function was costed out separately, no.
Okay.
And then we had the administrative staff who do the noticing. We're on track to do about 17,000 mailed notices this year. They do agenda preparation for the 4 or 5 boards and commissions that we staff, which we had, I believe, about 125 meetings of our boards, commissions, and hearing officers this year. So for performance measures, again, a lot of what we do is tied to quality of life, but these are the numbers that we're able to come up with. These are extrapolated to the end of the fiscal year. Design Review Board cases processed would be 73. Design Review Board exemptions, now their process are 624, and that's not just a stamp. That's someone looking at the plans and making a decision and possibly even having negotiations as to whether something needs to go to the board or not. The hearing officer cases are conditional use permits and variances. 150 other miscellaneous cases, from as simple as home occupation to as complex as historic district overlay zones. We've had 5 appeals to the Planning Commission, I think none to the City Council, and a number of our planners also are conducting hearings for appeals of neighborhood service fees. And
How many hearing officers do you have?
we have, I believe, 8 different staff who rotate as hearing officers.
You had 73 cases last year? So
Yes, sir.
10 cases a year per hearing officer?
No, it's not their only
Me,
duty. That's just something they do.
No,
It's
I
part of-
understand. And DRB exemptions, how are those exemptions processed? What does it take to process a DRB exemption?
Yeah, okay, well, it really varies by the complexity of the case. Sometimes it's very simple.
Days, weeks, or is it hours?
It could be hours, it could be any of them. It could be people who are
Could
negotiating.
be weeks?
It could be.
Yeah,
It
prob-
could be sometimes weeks. And we have had cases, I'm sorry to interrupt, where, for example, a person wants to make a modification after a design review, board approval has been given, or and then they want to make some changes to the plan, and they come with so many changes that we think warrants going back to the design review board. And there's this negotiation back and forth that happens. Oftentimes, in those cases, it sometimes can take weeks, because first they try with the frontline staff. They will not be happy with the answer they get. Then they meet usually with Tim and the frontline staff. They don't get that, and sometimes I have to sit down and tell them the same information. That is subsided over time, because a lot of the applicants have learned that their best bet is to find out if they want to get an exemption, ask for staff's recommendation to what they need to do so that it will be so minimal that will not warrant going to the design review board. But from time to time, there are applicants who still insist that they want staff approval at the exemption level and not go to DRB. That can be very complicated.
So on average,
On average, we were averaging almost one a day for a while, but now they have subsided to one maybe per month that goes to that level of complexity. But I don't know, maybe Mr. Foy can tell you what we get at the counter that...
ERB exemptions,
ERB
one a month?
I'm sorry?
Did you say one a month?
The ones that escalate to meeting with me and several staff members, yeah.
But on average,
On
they
average,
can walk in and...
well, if you take
If it's
600
within the guidelines, they'll just get the exemption, right? If it's within the law, then you have to give them the exemption, or is it
If it meets the
standards?
well, it's not only standards, it's also neighborhood compatibility issues
Right.
that come to play,
So
and
there's a
usually it
judgment-
takes some back and forth.
So is there a judgment call on part of staff in determining?
There's a big judgment call on part of staff, yes.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes the staff at the counter is not, we don't think they're qualified on certain exemptions, and they need to bring in senior staff member to make a judgment call for them.
And appeals is 5 appeals to the city council?
And those are to the Planning Commission. I
Planning
believe
commissions?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've had any appeals to City Council this
So
year.
last year there were 5 appeals to the planning commission?
Yes, there have been no design review appeals for a very long time to City Council. We may have had 1 or 2 CUP appeals, I don't remember, but basically to the Planning Commission.
And I would like to emphasize something about the number of appeals have gone dramatically down. The reason for that is that about a year and a half ago, staff started producing detailed staff reports, analysis, and recommendations to the hearing authority that are posted on the website of the Planning Division's agendas, and the community members can read that ahead of time. And based on the pre-analysis and the detailed staff report, the number of community members who are unhappy or worried about the cases, I have to say, has dropped substantially. And as a result, I can tell you that the number of appeals has dropped.
Is it because of that, or maybe there just aren't that many projects?
They're both. I think the fact that there aren't as many projects has something to do with it, but I can tell you that in the cases that go before a hearing authority, the fact that the community members can actually read the staff report and call and ask questions about the detailed staff report ahead of time. A lot of times staff are actually spending time with the calls before the hearing happens, as opposed to before, where the members of the community had to wait and hear about it at the hearing.
Do we have these numbers for the past, 5 years, as to how many cases were processed and all of that?
Yeah, we could have, if you would like a historic trend over the past 5 years, we could do that.
Or whatever you have, if it's more or less, or...
We can do that.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any surveys that you do as people come up to the counter? Do you give them a piece of paper saying, if I did really well, please turn this in to my supervisor so I get
No,
something of that sort?
We don't have a little
Not a suggestion box, but
comments
it's a
box.
survey,
we don't have a survey. We do
Or
from time to
community-
time get
right? Input.
letters of
That's true.
compliments, and
You
Occasional
don't?
complaint.
Do you have it? You don't have it?
we don't have a survey form.
Okay.
So these are the cost reductions that have taken place within the Planning Division since fiscal year 3 years ago. We have eliminated, as you can see, 3 positions. One actually eliminated from the general fund. Some of them were transfers to non-general fund sources of funding. Overtime for night meetings, we have asked our planners and our administrative staff, the planners who get overtime, which aren't many, and the administrative staff to instead consider taking comp time.
Tim, excuse me, can you go back for a second to the mobility planner? I just have a question. How does the mobility planner position, how is it different from what Colin Bogart did in the last 2 years? I know that there's a difference, but I'm curious if you can just spell that out for me a little.
Sure. My understanding is that Colin really focused a lot on bicycle planning, and the mobility planner has
And
done...
pedestrian.
And pedestrian, yes. And the mobility planner has taken a look at all sorts of travel modes. He's been involved in our parking studies. He's been involved in working with beeline studies. I know he was involved with the Riverwalk Park. So he takes kind of a broader look instead of simply bicycle and pedestrians. And he also is very key in tying it into our land use and zoning policies. I'm not sure if that is
Who holds that position currently?
his name is Michael Nielsen.
Oh, okay. You're transferring that salary.
That was done a number of years ago.
2 years ago.
2007.
Okay. I mean, the transit fund is a sorry fund in the first place. I mean, it's vastly underfunded.
Well, one of the things that he produces are the joint products between the Transportation Division and the Planning Division. For example, the mobility study of the downtown specific plan and the implementation program for it, or the management of the consultants' work to do all of the different studies that are coming to you for example, downtown parking. The mobility planner actually manages that. The mobility planner provided the draft ordinance for the TDM ordinance and made recommendations for the adjusted parking ratios for the downtown area. And then the mobility planner also created the program for a comprehensive valet parking and circulation parking, which worked jointly between transportation staff and planning division to come up for the downtown. These are some of the things that the mobility planner does that would go way beyond what Colleen Bogart does or what a traffic engineer could do.
It sounds like a big job for one person in a city of this size. So is he going to also be responsible for all of the implementation for the Safe and Healthy Streets Plan in terms of how it relates to planning?
In terms of how it relates to planning, he is responsible for making sure that they are correctly reflected in the general plan and the planning documents, and he works closely with Laura Stotler, who is in charge of the comprehensive planning program, and makes sure that the programs that are in all these other departments are correctly and completely reflected in the planning documents that are required by state law as under the mobility element of the general plan. Yes.
So these are from 2007 to 2008. So what have you done for us lately, I guess is the...
Well, there will be a slide later about the planned reductions, proposed reductions for the department.
I should note, this is since 2007-8. Some of these might have happened in 8, 9, 9, 10, so...
And what have you done for us lately?
So this is from 2008 until now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, and these,
Wait, you didn't finish going through the page. So you've eliminated overtime for night meetings. Does that mean that every time that your staff goes to a neighborhood meeting that's at night, they don't receive overtime?
well, as we said, the great majority of our staff isn't eligible for overtime.
Right, because they're management.
Right.
Thanks.
And the last item on this slide is reduced M&O, travel, training. We've almost completely cut out professional certifications, memberships, and dues. I know it's a small number, but our M&O was very small to begin with. We didn't have much fluff in there.
But again, this is 0708 you're showing us.
Since 07-08.
So is this a cumulative number?
No.
So every year since 0708 you've eliminated $4,900?
I'm sorry, it wasn't 4,900 each year. It's 4,900 since that year.
Every year. So it repeats every year. What's I think the significance of this slide is that you will get in a minute to a slide that shows we do not have any discretionary programs in the planning division to cut. The reason that we are down to the bone and the muscle, literally, is that we have been cutting whatever we could in the previous years. That's what this slide is supposed to signify. Not to say we did this, we shouldn't do anything more. And where we're proposing to cut is in fact filled staff position that would result in layoffs.
I'm sorry, that was what?
As you will see when Mr. Foy gets to this, to further reductions, the only place that remains, and we are proposing to reduce our program, is where we have a filled staff position that would result in a layoff, because there is nothing else discretionary that we could cut without affecting staffing.
Okay. I just want to, again, emphasize, if you cut 4,900 one year, how can you cut the same 4,900 next year and the year after that and the year after that? That's the question.
I think we cut from that year's budget.
Okay.
We have gradually cut $4,900.
And then it's not rebudgeted in subsequent years. It doesn't come back again.
Let me explain what that means. For example, the American Institute of Certified Planners, AICP, every person who is AICP certified has to pay upwards of $800, $900 per year to maintain the certification, and has to spend money to be on 32 units of ongoing education in order to maintain the certification. We used to provide the membership fees for people, or at least part of it, and we used to pay for their training in order to keep their certification. We stopped doing that. That means everybody, including myself, who is AICP, now needs to pay for that portion out of their own pocket, which is no longer covered by the planning division, although it's a benefit to the planning division. That's what that means.
As we noted earlier, we do almost all of our work in-house. We have very few consultant contracts. The first one is a historic district survey. It's actually the wrong name of a consultant, but it is largely grant funded from the National Trust. The second, Ariga Corporation, is expert review for the wireless telecommunication facility applications. We have a contract with them. We haven't actually spent any money because, at least for those applications which come before planning, there hasn't been a need for outside expert review. Of course. And the last is GRA-funded transit and mobility studies.
I'm sorry, what are these again?
Okay, the first one is for a historic district survey for a potential historic district to see if it qualifies. The second has to do with our wireless telecommunications ordinance, where sometimes we may ask an applicant to prove that their wireless facilities are really necessary, that there's really a gap in coverage, that this is really the best location, that the proposed facility can't be in a different place or at a lower height.
These are professional services that are...
This would be funded by an applicant, whoever is requesting the wireless
But they're
facility.
professional services from people that we hire outside the city, right?
Yes, these are our only contracts.
Okay. And they're all either applicant or grant funded, or GRA?
Yes, I think of all of these, the city is liable for $9,000 in matching for the historic one.
If I can, you had asked us earlier to give you a sense in each department of the professional services used. They use these three for these purposes, and he's given you a sense that none of them affect the general fund. They're all either grant funded, or the applicant, in the case of wireless, has to pay for any work done by the consultant.
If there aren't any further questions, I will turn this over to Building and Safety.
I just want to remind you that no, Mr. Hagani, the comparative in terms of cases, if you could get that, I'd appreciate it.
Mayor Friedman, members of the council, Stuart Tom, representing the building department. Moving on to the next of the three primarily general funded segments of community development, we get to building and safety, which is a fairly traditional building and safety organization. We're comprised of three primary core services, as you can see on the slide: Administrative and Permit Services Center, our Plan, Check, and Engineering Services, and our Field Inspection Services. With respect to the first, Administrative and Permit Services Center, this basically represents the city's one-stop development center. This is where all administrative services related to plan check submittal, permit issuance, records management, cashiering not only for building and safety, but for other operations within the city that don't have a bona fide cashiering function. And then, of course, the daily financial reconciliation to make sure that all the cash, check, and the credit card transactions have been handled pursuant to Department of Finance guidelines. The public counter also provides multi-departmental services so that the customers don't have to run throughout the city in order to get their projects done. And, of course, we provide information and consultation to all of our customers. The second core service, which is our plan check and engineering services operation, provides comprehensive plan review of federal, state, and local building standards. To sum it up, this is where we check plans to ensure compliance with architectural and fire and life safety standards, structural plan review and seismic safety assessments, a disabled access plan review, energy conservation. Of course, we also provide all of the sub-trade review, mechanical plan check, electrical plan check, and plumbing plan check. And then recently, as of January 1st of this year, the state mandated that we check plans for compliance with Cal Green, which of course we will be coming back to the City Council with some proposals at a later date. The third and final core service that Building and Safety provides is our field inspection operation. Here we provide comprehensive construction inspections related to all ongoing development. They include such things, this won't be a comprehensive list, but I think you'll get the idea, shoring and excavation inspections, foundation inspections, structural framing inspections, fire and life safety, as well as egress, disabled access, and energy conservation inspections. And then since we do the reviews for the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing plan checks, we have to do the inspections for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing as well. Next slide. These are the performance measures for Building and Safety this year. As the Planning Division did, we projected this out 2 more months to the close of the 2010-2011 fiscal year. As you can see, Building and Safety is quite busy. In terms of walk-in customers served, we will handle 22,800 walk-in customers through our doors. Our walk-in...
You will handle or you handled?
Well, we've handled basically 10/12 of that through the end of... But we
so you
projected
handled,
out.
It's not...
Yeah, we
it's
handle.
not in the future, okay.
Absolutely. What do the walk-in customers get from us? They get a variety of services, including general information. A lot of them come in to consult with us for project viability to find out if there are going to be any problems with their proposals. Basic permits that can be issued right over the counter and don't even require a plan checker handled there. Owner-builder assistance for people who are planning on projects on their own homes. And then, of course, records that we keep within the Permit Services Center. Just like our walk-in customers, we're quite busy on the telephone. Once again, projecting it out to the end of this fiscal year, 2 more months, we'll handle 11,500 telephone calls, and those people basically ask for the same types of service. In terms of plans reviewed, we will approve or review 4,600 plans. Those 4,600 plans can essentially be broken down into 2 groups. The first group, which is the bulk of our plan reviews, are our building plan checks, for which we will plan check 3,550 plans. And then the other category are mechanical, electrical, and plumbing plan checks. We will handle 1,050 plan checks. Once those plans are reviewed, a good portion of them go to permit issuance, and we will issue 8,400 permits. To break that out, 4,050 of those permits will be building permits, 1,180 will be mechanical permits, 1,190 will be electrical permits, 1,050 will be plumbing permits, and then roughly 900 fall into a category that we call miscellaneous permits. And those include ancillary types of structures, signs, temporary certificates, applications, and things like that.
How many building permits against her?
The building permits will be 4,050.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Are the number of plans reviewed and permits issued part of the walk-in customers served?
Some of those walk-in customers do have plans that we can review right over the counter, yes. In terms of the inspections performed, our field inspection operation is busy all day long. They will perform 16,200 inspections. In terms of the volume of the work that we will do, our total construction valuation, as you can see, is $225 million. To give you a sense of comparison, the average valuation that we typically see is right around $110 million. So this year we will have seen slightly more than double that. And that's reflected also in our last performance measure, which is our total revenue. You can see that for 2010-2011, we will see revenue within Building and Safety of $4.46 million. Our average revenue for building and safety is $3.3 million as a conservative estimate. In the Wildan study this morning, you saw that Wildan estimated our average revenue at $3.4 million, which is right in the ballpark of what I estimate. What's notable is that this is a significant increase in both our construction valuation and our total revenue, primarily because of some heavy activity within our redevelopment agency. There are some very, very large projects that came in for review this year, for which we've also completed those reviews and issued permits, and so that contributes to some of that construction valuation and total revenue. But even if you were to take some of those large projects out, while the economy has hit the greater LA Basin area, for some reason, Glendale has remained fairly busy. And so some of that is due to some additional projects, but then some is also due to the fact that we still have a lot of projects going on. Next slide.
Can I request that we have historical data?
Sure.
5 years, I guess.
Absolutely.
Back, as well as the same question that I asked from planning. I'll ask you: do you have surveys? Do you hand out surveys to the customers that you serve?
Yes, actually, in the Permit Services Center, we've done that for over a decade. They are available. I'll tell you, people tend to be too busy to take the time to fill them out, but every now and then we do get those customer satisfaction surveys dropped off.
Right. Can you give us the data or the information that you have?
I'll go back to the office, and if we've received any, I'll be happy to furnish that.
Do you have it over the past few years?
We keep every single one that we receive, and so if we have any,
documented somewhere, or
we put them in a binder.
In binders?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't get a lot of them. We give one to, if an individual staff member is identified, we give one to them, and then we put another one in a binder.
Yeah.
Can I just say, in terms of surveys for the planning department, having been on the design review board for 5 years, you don't necessarily always want your applicants to have a good survey. So I mean, I think it would be interesting to see what they thought, but you'd have to take that with a very big grain of salt, because people get upset when they don't get to do everything that they want to do.
No, it's not the design review process, but
planning in general. When
people who come up to the planning.
When people come up to the counter and say, "I want to do this project," and planning says to them, "You have to go to design review, or it's not within code," they get upset. So I'm just saying that you have to find a way of, if you're going to take a survey, of filtering people that are getting bad service, which we'd want to know about, from people who just don't get to do whatever they want to do.
Well, that I understand, but I would like to know how many people get upset and how many people don't get upset. I think surveys generally show the good and the bad, and maybe there's a lot more good than there is bad, and it would be interesting to see. So.
Next slide, please. Once again, in terms of our cost reductions, and we also gave comparisons from since the 2007-2008 year, you'll see that we saw a contractual services reduction of slightly more than $250,000 at $280,000. This is due primarily to the termination of contract work associated with the maintenance and development of our Kiva permit management system. As you're probably well aware, we eventually ended up abandoning the Kiva permit management system because it was not serving the city, and the CSI system, which is used by multiple departments, has been integrated into Building and Safety's workflow as well. Just like the Planning Division, we have also reduced our training. We were only able to do it slightly by $3,000 because Building and Safety is somewhat unique in that there's a state assembly bill, AB 717, which legally requires a staff that reviews and enforces building standards which fall under the umbrella of state Title 24 to receive 45 hours of training every 3 years, and it authorizes us to charge our customers for that training. So the remaining training, which is in our budget to cover the state-mandated training, has already been accounted for, and we get full recovery through the fees that we do charge. And then in terms of our last item, we transferred our permit services administrator to the Public Works Administration Office. While this does not represent a reduction in salary, it is a service level reduction within Building and Safety. Next slide.
Transfer the position to Public Works?
Yes.
And it's a permit services individual?
He was previously our permit services administrator. When he transferred to Public Works, his position was changed to Public Works administrator.
Okay. Does he still do the same work?
I'm not quite sure what Public Works administration
Okay,
is.
so he's not in your department, he's basically out
That's
of the
correct.
department. It's not the same individual in your department being charged for public works?
That's correct. He does not
Right.
fall underneath my budget.
Right,
The
okay.
position was eliminated in building
Right,
and safety.
okay. All right.
It was a method of saving the individual as opposed to...
And Public Works needed that position,
Yes.
basically, that's
Yes.
what.
Since we were requested to list our professional services providers, Building and Safety has 3, only one of which is actually in use, and that would be the first one, data microimaging. DMI provides our digital document conversion services for archiving approved construction plans. DMI is a full-service imaging firm which is capable of converting all of our documents to digital format, but we rely upon them primarily for our large format blueprints. Those documents that are smaller in size, if they're technical reports, if we're able to do it in-house, our own staff scans those ourselves to reduce cost. But even this one, data microimaging, is a complete fee offset. I keep track of and I review my fees within Building and Safety on a regular basis, and we've made sure that the fee that we collect for every sheet of plans that we approve and accept covers not only the fee that DMI charges the city, but our additional overhead that is associated with that work, because after the work is digitized and the data is given back to the city, we're still responsible for reviewing and validating those digitized files to ensure the accuracy and quality of those images, and to make sure that they're indexed properly so that we and our customers can find those images. The last 2 professional services are really just on retainer for us, so that if we need to, for a variety of reasons, including the Permit Streamlining Act, we can farm some of the work out if we aren't able to keep up the necessary or desired pace. Those 2 professional services vendors are California Code Check and Wildan and Associates. This is the same Wildan that performed the fee study earlier today, but it's a different subsidiary of their company that specializes in plan review and municipal inspection services. And that's the same line of business that California Code Check is in. It is important to note that we do keep them on retainer only, and I have not relied upon them at all this fiscal year, and I do not plan on doing so for the remaining 2 months of this year. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. If not, I will turn it over to Mr. Engel. Thank you.
When are we going to see the dollar amounts attached to all this stuff?
We'll close with that.
Good afternoon, Mayor Friedman, members of the City Council. We're going to move on into the Neighborhood Services Division. And we'll start off with our 3 layers of core services. We have broken those down organizationally within neighborhood services in community outreach, field operations, and code compliance. And then it says up there administrative process, and that's kind of bureaucratic for the administration aspect of what we do in neighborhood services. Our core services really revolve around our mission, which is making sure that all our neighborhoods are safe and clean places that are desirable for our residents to live, work, or recreate. It's in keeping with our mandate that all of our housing be habitable up to the standard established by the state at a minimal level, and up to the standards established by our citizens, which certainly exceed that. And that all of our public areas comply with codes and standards that are applicable to our jurisdiction. And more importantly than that, the method that you and your predecessors have said that we need to do that is make sure that our residents are engaged and informed about that process. And for that reason, as you talk to your colleagues in other cities, we are not a code enforcement division. We are neighborhood services, and that philosophy and that direction we take from you is ingrained in everything that we do. We start with the community outreach section. Their primary function is code enforcement support, making sure that our residents are educated about what those standards are that are make our community the special place that it is. All of our staff is mindful of the fact that people that are in Glendale are here because they want to be here, not because they can't be someplace else. And because of that, we have a unique opportunity to capitalize on their desire and support for our community to become engaged. The support for code enforcement includes educational flyers, all of the different media stuff that we do, and just different ways that we communicate what's expected to our residents before we ever go along the code enforcement process, which we'll talk later about. Community volunteers and service projects. One of the ways we're able to hold down the cost of doing city services is using community members whenever we can. We have the Great American Cleanup coming up as one example, but we have regular cleanup activities, regular volunteer activities that happen week after week, month after month, on a regular basis that go on. And that really helps hold down city costs over the long haul. Last but not least is resident engagement. People that are engaged with what we do tend to have a support for the community values that we are charged with enforcing. Getting them involved in the different things has really helped, I think, hold down some of our costs over the long haul. And when we talk about performance measures, you'll see some of that. But it really comes down to community outreach. Moving into the heart of the operation, which is field operations and code compliance, our citywide graffiti removal and prevention section falls under field operations. It's integrated with our code enforcement operation and with public right-of-way services that we work on jointly with Public Works. Moving into the next part, housing habitability. We received designation from the state of California to operate a housing habitability inspection program, which has been incredibly successful over the last 10 years. This is our 10th year anniversary of doing that, in improving the habitability of our existing housing stock. You sit as the housing authority, you know that we're not building much new housing. The housing that we have right now is housing we have to preserve, and this is one method that's been very successful of doing that. And then general municipal code enforcement for neighborhood services in the code enforcement, code compliance division. We are a consolidated operation in that we do enforcement for a variety of different things, not just the housing code. We enforce the city's zoning standards. We enforce the whole gamut of municipal code requirements. There are certain specific requirements of state law that the council has designated that our staff enforce. We work with Glendale Water and Power and enforce the habitability issues resulting with utility issues that are encountered by the Water and Power Division, and all of the different things. Suffice it to say, we're a consolidated operation doing all of those things. Last but not least, a big chunk of keeping our neighborhoods in a quality situation are how our rights of way are maintained, and this is really the problem-solving effort that you'll see later on in part of our presentation. If we're able to maintain those rights of way, our city looks like it's maintained, and that follows through with how our residents deal with their own private property, and our staff works on that. Last but not least...
How do you maintain the rights of way?
We have staff that pick up bulky items. We have, obviously, the graffiti removal, the stuff that happens on those rights of way. If there's a problem out there that staff comes across, like there's, someone's dropped a bag of meat on the street, happened 2 weeks ago. Staff goes out, they clean up the bag of meat in the hallway. Those kind of things on a regular basis.
Doesn't Public Works do that?
We work hand in hand with Public Works. We have the ability to send staff out fairly quickly because they're already in the neighborhoods. That's their job. The 5 field representatives are already out there. We're able to get them on the radio and respond fairly quickly to do that. We work hand in hand with Public Works. They call us, we call them, which is, I think, helped both of us with some efficiencies.
Question. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I'm barraged by emails and letters from groups, private contractors that do graffiti removal. And, they cite these, great savings by, not having the benefits and the health and all that other stuff. What's our thought on that? Just contracting out with a private, I know we've started to do it in parks. I mean, we do some of our Crestview or Parkland, whatever the company is that does that. Is that something that was discussed and debated?
Yeah, could we jump to slide 25 real quick? There it is. Let's go down to graffiti square footage removed. 172,000 square feet of graffiti per year. When we started neighborhood services in 1989, and the number gradually went up, we peaked at 1,080,000 square feet of graffiti per year. We had 4 people removing graffiti in this town at that time, and that was 1993, no, not quite 20 years ago. During that time, by blending graffiti removal with code enforcement, with the police gang diversion program, and with a philosophy from our city council that this city will be graffiti free, we have reduced that number from 1,080,000 square feet of graffiti a year down to 172,000, just a little under 15,000 square feet of graffiti a month. We've reduced the number of staff since 1993 from 4 people down to 1.5. We have 1.5 people. What does that other half a person do? He cleans bus benches. I defy anybody to come in and do it for less money than we're able to do and do that. We look at the proposals when people ask us, how many people do you have removing graffiti in a community of 30-plus square miles, 36 square miles? I mean, you take out the hillsides, for a community of roughly 200,000 people, depending on what you want with the census at this point, people can't do it. Have them call me. Once they talk to us and see what we do and what we require our graffiti workers to do, to coordinate with the police department, to coordinate with the code enforcement officer, to make sure that we have a relationship with that private property owner who might get tagged. I don't think anybody can do it, Councilmember Najarian. Happy to talk to him.
So you're saying it's 1.5 positions?
Yes.
So any savings would not be that great monetarily, and it's
Not really.
ingrained in these other relationships with other divisions?
Yes.
That answers my question.
And if you get those emails, I know you get barraged with them, send them over and we'll be happy to talk to them. Because as you can tell, we're proud of the statistic, and we are.
Thank you.
Can we go back to one slide? Moving into administration, all of our code enforcement officers, if they're not able to get compliance during a routine code enforcement case, one of our management staff, and we'll talk about who those people are in a minute, meets with every single person that isn't able to comply and sorts out what the issues are. We do a number of office conferences. We do a number of hearings in those areas. We talked about Wildan this morning and some of their fee recommendation. With some of our fees, they require a hearing. So all of those things have to be properly noticed for making sure that we're able to invoice people and they have adequate notice. And those are some administrative things in the state administrative code that we're required to do. So the hearings and office conference takes up a big chunk. We do a lot of landlord-tenant counseling, especially in the last 9 months. That falls under administration. It's probably half of one of our administrative analysts' job at this point.
What kind of counseling?
I'm sorry?
What kind of counseling?
I'm about to be evicted. What can I do? And then you go through the litany of questions. Did you pay your rent? What led to you being evicted? What are your options at this point? And the same with the landlord. I've got a difficult tenant. They've lost their job, but I haven't collected rent in 3 months. What can I do under the city's just cause for eviction ordinance? I don't want to put it all on all tenants calling, but the significant number of landlords saying, in Glendale, you're a little unique. You don't have rent control, yet you have the just cause for eviction ordinance. How do we explain that to them? And then operational support, which is pretty typical, handling all of those things. The one thing that didn't make it to the slide is we do centralized customer service for the entire city. People don't know where to call, can call that 3700 number, and the customer service reps triage the call. Let's move on to the next slide. These are our performance measures for 2010, 2011. In terms of those customer service requests coming in either over the phone, over the internet, or walk-in, or an interdepartmental referral, we handled 16,840, or will have by the end of the year. There's a 2-month projection built into that. In the last 2 years, we have beefed up our online service requests, either filing a service request through the city's website or through the iPhone application called My Glendale. The subset of that 16,840, 4,500 of those are now coming in electronically. The rest of those you can deduce are either coming in over the phone or through walk-ins or interdepartmental referrals. Graffiti square footage we've talked about a little bit. Unduplicated outreach contacts. One of the things that's real important that comes out to why we are neighborhood services and not code enforcement is this ability to make sure that or this requirement actually for us as staff to make sure that we connect with the community. And those are the unduplicated outreach contacts for the last year, not counting media. And I can go through this because it looks like a phenomenal number, but it's right.
Do you have comparative on these numbers?
It's the first time we were ever asked to do it because it's the first time we did it as a performance measure. We will now year to year.
Do you have surveys, customer satisfaction surveys?
As a matter of fact, we do.
And
I don't
data?
save them. You ask Stuart. What happens if they come in and they're negative? Generally, we pull the staff person in that they're about and say, we got some feedback. How would you handle this differently?
I
Blah,
would
blah,
think
blah.
that you would save the positive ones.
Actually, we read them at staff meeting, and everybody cheers and that kind of stuff. It's a great motivation. We get the positive ones. We get about 5 to 6 a month. Rental housing certified. We've talked about the rental housing inspection program. This year, we will have certified 2,290 units. Compared to last year, we certified 3,400. And when we did this slide, I haven't figured out why it's down. And I'll find that out if anybody wants to know. I want to know, but if you want to know, I'll let you know what I find out.
Okay, please let us know.
And is the fee suggestion going to be something you're going to be bringing back for discussion?
Yeah, we'll bring that back as well. And then code compliance cases cleared, 3,725.
And how many individuals you have for rental units, inspection of rental units and separately code compliance?
Sure. Going down to the next to the bottom, the performance measure rental unit certified. We have 2 housing technicians that are doing and producing that number. And moving to the last line, code and compliance cases cleared. There are 6 code neighborhood services inspectors that would have produced that number. It's about 600 apiece. Over for service level reductions.
Mr. Engel?
Yes.
For people who are in violation of codes and sort of habitual code violators, do we have a mechanism to assess a fee to them for the work that we have to do to bring them back into compliance? And I don't mean just the person whose yard gets, overgrown and they get a warning, but people that are kind of the routine violators who have a track record of code violations that take up staff time to resolve.
Mayor Friedman, members of the council, I would say yes, but there's 2 parts to that. There are habitual violators that I would say are deliberate, and there's a method that we deal with that. There are recurrent violators that are people that have personal difficulties, and your philosophical direction to us is to treat them differently. And that's the way we do. So in answer to your question, the short answer is yes, but it's really 2 different tracks.
I understand, but for the ones that are habitual and that are deliberate, the car business that's constantly parking where they know they're not supposed to be parking, I'm just throwing out some example that just came on the top of my head, but something where the person knows that what they're doing is wrong, but for whatever reason,
yes,
they've made this sort of conscious decision, and not because of difficulty, but just because we don't fine them for it. Is there a way to assess a fee if we're not doing that?
Council members, Mayor Friedman, one of the things that you'll see whenever you come down to our proposals for the upcoming year is to switch, and this is a huge switch for us as an operation in the city of Glendale, to using what are called administrative citations. When you adopted the new zoning regulations for the downtown entertainment zone, as a part of that report, adopted an administrative citation program that would allow us to use administrative citations in that zone, and then to come back to you as a part of the budget process with an administrative citation program for you citywide. And we're going to present that to you. In researching it up to this point and working with our city attorney and working with a couple of other cities, we've solved a couple of the issues, quite honestly, that nagged at me before implementing it here. One, our philosophy working with the community that has come from our city council sometimes conflicts with the fact that an administrative citation could be implemented fairly quickly. We've solved that by putting a warning notice in front of a citation, similar to what we do with smoking. We're not going into that right now, but we do a warning notice before we do that. But once we get that, it will allow us to fairly quickly put an administrative penalty on someone without having to go down to a very lengthy criminal process that it has been difficult. And we solved a couple of administrative issues with that. You'll hear about it later. I don't know whether you want to talk about it any further than that, but it's a proposal to be coming to you June-ish.
Okay, thank you.
And going into the general fund reduction since 2007, 2008, and that number was arbitrarily picked because I really wish they'd picked 2006, 2007, because we lost 2 positions the year before. But for this, using the same thing we're using citywide, we've eliminated a customer service representative. As we have reduced our budget, we had to reduce our budget by $65,000. We eliminated a customer service representative and split the load amongst the remaining 5. We eliminated a full-time program specialist from the outreach side of the operation, reduced by $65,000 the following year. And then we've downgraded a position of program coordinator to program specialist to the tune of $14,000. You won't see any training or maintenance and operations cuts up there because those have been gone for a long time. We're at the point where we can't cut that anymore. We're at the basic level at this point. A couple of things real quickly because we don't have slides for them, but so that we're consistent with everyone else. We have no overtime budgeted in neighborhood services. There are going to be occasions where there is overtime and we use savings from other accounts to pay for that, but we do not budget overtime. And those incidents where that would happen would be when we have an after-hours call-out. Whenever the code enforcement officers get called out after hours, a building's been damaged, we have an indigenous Cree call out, those kind of things where we have to do that. We have to pay overtime. So there's nothing budgeted. So if you were to see that line item up there, you wouldn't see that. Last but not least, we have no contracts or professional service agreements. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Lansafame will take over for the redevelopment agency.
Mayor Friedman, members of the City Council, Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency. A little bit unique. When we merged the 2 departments, Community Planning and Community Redevelopment and Housing, we also created a department that has 3 distinct and legally separate budgets. So we'll go through the housing budget and the redevelopment budget here, and we'll try and give you the total picture of the entire department. The budget for the redevelopment agency includes the 3 divisions shown there: redevelopment, economic development, and the new policy and innovation. Slide, please. This is our mission statement. You may be familiar with it. It has been for several years. Generally, all the departments are about improving the quality of life. The redevelopment agency typically uses development to achieve that quality in these areas. Please. The core services for the redevelopment division, public-private development. This is where the redevelopment agency is engaged in a project to help eliminate blight. That is our overarching mission. But in terms of public-private, this would have a staff that works from cradle to grave, where you might issue an RFP or acquire property through construction management and then ongoing contract administration for things like the Americana brand, where we have ongoing participation. Private development and coordination assistance. This again is project management, but it is where a private developer is developing the project on his own. We saw this with Broadway Lofts most recently. You, as the redevelopment agency, approved stage 1 for the Crown residential project. The philosophy is if we can get them through entitlement and plan check, they are writing a permit check much faster. The project can get built more smoothly, and it will come on and produce revenue for the city in some form. That's really the philosophy behind the process streamlining. We have staff that is constantly looking at processes, see where we can make changes to maintain our quality, but make sure that those projects are entitled in the redevelopment project area faster. Again, with the effort to eliminate any blighting conditions. We have a large involvement, I should say, in public infrastructure and facilities funding. The tax increment that is generated from redevelopment projects and in redevelopment project areas oftentimes is put back into projects that will benefit the general community, but they're projects that are located in the redevelopment project areas. We'll touch on those in a bit. Then we have a whole host of mostly state reporting every year, what we're doing, what our statement of indebtedness, and other reports that need to come on an annual basis. We also have reporting requirements every 5 years with an implementation plan with a midterm report. So a lot of our measures are done with that report. This is some performance measures that we put together. Redevelopment is a little bit more difficult than a standard general fund operation where people walk through the door and we provide a service. A lot of times what we're accomplishing through a development project will take several years to come to fruition. What we've tried to do here is list from 2010-11 some of the things that we were achieving and we hope to achieve with our efforts. The new jobs created through projects, a little bit of a cheat on that. That's mostly DreamWorks and the Walt Disney Phase 2. Phase 2 is under construction right now, so that number would be more accurate when they occupy the building. That represents about 1,200 jobs. The construction jobs created, though, is accurate. We went back and looked at all the projects that were under construction during the last year, and the numbers of construction jobs that were identified, we totaled them, and so we're at a little over almost 4,900 jobs. Projects in pre-development, 22. That could be in any stage where they have come in to talk to us through the entitlement phase. So when Stuart talked about a lot of activity in Glendale, this is some of it. We're trying to feed the pipeline with our activities. This transit occupancy tax generated, this is a number that we took from the Finance Department from last year. These are the two redevelopment hotels projects that were hotels, the Embassy Suites and the Hilton Hotel. Generated $1.4 million in general fund money for general services. Again, that was this agency's sponsoring of those projects. And just last month or a couple months ago, you had final approvals on a third hotel, Courtyard by Marriott, so we hope to add to that number in the coming years. Project assists, this is projects that we've touched in any way. Somebody may have called and asked, what can I do on this piece of property? All the way from that all the way through to entitlement and construction management. We keep a log of those, and so we are working or touching something in the neighborhood of 112 projects. This next number is something that it's hard for us to take credit for, but it is, I think, a measurement of the activity that is happening and your commitment to a robust redevelopment program. We measured the increase in assessed value in the Central Glendale project area and the San Fernando Road project area. Central has an assessed value of $3 billion. That's up 3%. San Fernando Road, $1.6 billion, up 2%. And while those may not seem like large numbers, when you apply them to $3 billion and 1.6 it is. We also compared that to the county. The county was actually down 1.5%. So you might have a 4.5% swing between our central project area and what was happening in the surrounding area. And then finally, the commercial development that we've had that has been part of our program, 1.1 million square feet this last year, both new construction and rehabilitation. I will say we also started to look at crime trends. Some of the new legislation that's being proposed is asking redevelopment agencies to look at that. In our central project area, Crimes reported, overall crimes reported was down, although calls for services was up a little bit. In the San Fernando Road project area, both calls for service and reported crimes were both down.
You have comparatives on these numbers?
We don't, Mr. Manukian. This is the first year we started tracking it. As they say, it's often difficult because things like jobs created, we might not have a project now come to fruition for 3 or 4 years.
What about surveys of customer satisfaction? I know that the people that you deal with are different than the actual individuals in the community because you're dealing with some of the major projects in the city, but still, do you have a sense, or do you give them a customer satisfaction survey?
I'm glad you asked the question. We don't give them a customer satisfaction survey, but a point of pride for our department is developers will offer that this is one of the best cities to work with. We have even had developers whose project was denied that said that working with the department was much easier and more smooth than any other city they worked in. And we've heard that from...
With the redevelopment department?
With the redevelopment. Well, anytime we have a project manager, and now we're extending our project management program to citywide through community development, because now being one department, it's a philosophy that we're trying to bring to the case planners as well as the project managers. We have heard from developers. They've offered it to us. As I say, it's a point of pride for us. It's nice to hear. We don't have any surveys or letters on that. Next slide, please. This is our budget for redevelopment. You will see the proposed budget there and adopted with comparisons. Big items to look at are the increase in M&O. That is predominantly to debt service that we're incurring this year, as well as an increase of the payback on the city loan. That is offset a little bit over last year by our ERAF payment. That is payment we sent to the state. As a matter of fact, we just sent it $2.2 million last Friday, and that is what Mr. Starbird referred to as a state take that is in litigation now. We're appealing to try and get those funds back. When you're appealing against somebody that controls the purse strings, we think that money is probably gone, but we can always hope. On the projects, the $12.6 million increase, another large increase there, is really reflective of 2 CIP projects, Central Avenue improvements, so we will be improving that street, Main Arterial, and then it's the second phase of funding for the Central Library renovation. The total amount was about $10 million. Included in this year's budget is almost $4 million for the second phase of that. Next slide, please. In terms of capital improvements...
One moment.
I have a quick question.
I'm sorry.
The Central Avenue, that's going to be blacktop and signage and striping?
It will be a reconstruction, not a full reconstruction of the street, but some resurfacing. We'll also look at some aesthetics, sidewalk in areas. We're trying to work in some street lights and some bike paths. It won't be a widening of the street per se, but we will be reconstructing, not a full reconstruction.
Is the Central Avenue reconstruction in here?
Central Avenue, from, I believe it's Broadway through the freeway, to the freeway, the 134 freeway. This is our capital improvement.
What about south of Broadway?
I'm sorry, say, the south of Broadway was improved with the Americana brand.
Right.
This is our capital improvement projects from the redevelopment agency that will be included in the agency budget. What we've done here is we've shown you in white. Those are the redevelopment agency, pure redevelopment agency projects. Those in green are more general benefit projects. You see the central area improvement in the central library there. There's also the rehabilitation of the old police building, and then a small amount of funding for the mobility implementation. We will go over the ones in green, again, I think it's on May 27th, as part of the larger CIP program. Next slide, please. In the San Fernando Road project area, those two top projects, those are contract commitments that we made with the Walt Disney Company to set aside tax increment that was generated. It is to go to improve public, or to develop public improvements. As they are built by the Walt Disney Company, they are reimbursed. They fund them and then they are reimbursed. But they are for public improvements that benefit the entire North Corridor. The Disney Phase 2 project, $50,000 there. That is an amount for, if it's needed, for fire overtime, plan check overtime. We fund a plan checker in building and safety, and so this is with a tight timeline. Again, we thought that this was a benefit for us to be able to provide that and get the project online that much quicker. The Creative Corridor Incentives, this is a program that the agency just recently approved. We anticipate that most of the projects that we will do will be the interior systems upgrades, like fire sprinklers. And then facade improvements grant program, very popular. We do about 10 a year. We have some funding still available, and we'd like to augment it with another 250. Next slide. In the general fund, you saw through our first budget study session, you saw the revenues and the projections on revenues. Being that this is an independent budget, we wanted to show you revenues and give you an idea. The tax increment is just up a bit. The bond proceeds, actually, we've got them italicized because those bond proceeds of almost $35 million were realized this year. They weren't part of the adopted 10-11 budget, so they really didn't fall anywhere. That's why we put it here to let you know that that funding is available for projects as they come to you. Revenue generating, these are...
I have a question, Phil. Of the 34.9, how much is tax deductible and how much is going to...
These were all taxable bonds.
Oh, they're all taxable.
They're all taxable bonds, so they can be used for just about any purpose that we listed in the indenture. The revenue-generating projects are, they're for the most part loans. The Embassy Suites, and then a loan to the school district to reconstruct Moyes Field. They repay us with a pass-through amount that they are entitled to from our tax increment. The rental income, it stays the same. We own the units on Maryland at the Exchange Garage. We have the Panda Inn and a couple other sites in the Orange Street Garage. And then our interest earnings are on our fund balances. This is the projected proposed budget of 1.3. Next. In San Fernando Road, things stay pretty much the same. There's not a lot of activity and not a lot of benefit from us. Most of what we generate in San Fernando, we pass through to the other taxing entities. We're projecting the same amounts. The county tax sharing, though, is an interesting concept. We pass through to the county almost 50% of the total tax increment that is generated. This is one of those, I don't know that it's ever happened before, occasions where we negotiated a deal with the county to pass back to us 60% of what we give them. That is then put to use on an identified set of regional public improvements. We use this funding for the Flower Street crossing and at-grade safety measures. We've used them on some transportation projects as well.
A little clarification, that's 60% of the funds generated from the Disney project.
No, this is actually 60% of what we pass through to the county for the total. But it is capped at about $75 million. So we have a ways to go before we reach that limit. Next slide, please. Mr. Milano had talked earlier today about being aggressive and using redevelopment to fund parks, and I would I would submit that libraries go along with that. In 2007, the Redevelopment Agency adopted a policy to set aside 75% of the tax increment that is generated from new housing projects and 25% from commercial projects. The format that we put together is to create a budget form for you and report on it every year. Unfortunately, 2007 was when the economy started to take a dip and development dried up, and so we really didn't see any completion of projects that were eligible for this set-aside. However, I am happy to report that the project, the 34 condominium units at 220 East Broadway, will come online this coming year, and we anticipate that it will spin off about $108,000, which would be 75% of their total tax increment. So we are suggesting that you set aside $108,000 for a future park project. We have not had any funds, and this is not a critical mass to go out and do something with, but we are reporting on it for you and would suggest that we all keep in mind that this money is available. As we add to it, we'll want to identify projects that we can program it to. Next slide. While we haven't had a lot of development that has taken place to set aside for parks and libraries, this agency has committed to parks and libraries, and you have funded almost $23 million, a little over $23 million in parks and libraries. Predominantly in these here, the Adult Recreation Center, the construction, $7 million, was funded by the Redevelopment Agency. Griffith Manor Park, if you recall, those of you that were here in 2000, with the Disney agreement, the Redevelopment Agency committed to setting aside $3 million for Griffith Manor. That has been used for the current project to rehabilitate that park.
And Phil, the Adult Recreation Center, included in that is the Central Park re-landscaping and the removal of the old buildings. That was all redevelopment as well, wasn't it?
Mr. Starbird, I think the project was around $11 million, and we funded $7 million. I'm not sure how it was split. The soccer field is something that we identified at Columbus. That EIR is currently out for comment, and if that project goes forward, that would be about $3.2 million of agency funds that would be committed. The library, this is a centerpiece of that whole complex. Mr. Mnuchin, you asked about it earlier. The former planning department and redevelopment department together put together a master plan for the agency that would realign the library with a north-south access and come into a central area between the ARC and the library, creating a very civic complex. Then a total renovation of the central library for next generation. This is a very exciting project for us, and the redevelopment agency has committed $10 million to that. Next slide. You had asked for professional services. These are the list of contracts we have. They fall into these groups: legal services to augment that of our in-house counsel. The agency does have a dedicated attorney. Ms. Van Meiden is your general counsel. We have others that help in things. Oliver Sandifer and Murphy, eminent domain. Stradling Yaka is transactional. Jones Hall, if you remember, is bond counsel, so we use them sparingly. Myers Nave is somebody that is expert in greenfield and brownfield remediation. And then Knapp Peterson & Clark is a local firm that does unique type transactional work. Design services, if we're involved in a project that the redevelopment agency is sponsoring, we will typically hire a designer for that, and they will work very closely with our design studio. And so they're the firms that we use. AECOM is working on the pass-through, the Paseo, from Central Park. Architectural Resources Group is a group that is working with us on a proposed expansion of the Alex Theater to the south to fix some of their loading issues. Hunt Design is doing the wayfinding signage, and Shimoda Design Group is designed the building you approved at 216 South Brand, where the Museum of Neon Art is slated. Construction jobs, again, if we have the need for it, we have these on retainer. Doja is mainly a demolition, EP Associates, soils. Financial services, these are typically pre-development, where we will use their services to get an idea of what's happening in the industry that we may not be aware because of the level of activity that happens in Glendale. Harrell and Company is specialized for bonds. Corn and HDL Corn and Cone, we share with the Finance Department to track our property tax and sales tax. Some of the others that we use, again, our specialty, Impact Sciences, is an environmental firm. North Star Destination is doing the branding. Praxis, our GATE program, the Glendale area temporary exhibits. NBS Government Financial Group is doing our property-based business improvement district. We have noted those that are one-time projects, and they are noted with an asterisk there. Next slide.
You have annual costs on all these contracts?
We can get those for you. The contracts amount.
Thank you. And you said you have a firm that helps you track property sales tax?
Property and sales tax, yes.
Can we get that data as well?
I believe you do a sales tax, and you get a monthly report. I'm sorry, quarterly report.
Quarterly?
We get a quarterly report on sales taxes. We also receive a database by business, which we cannot share with you because it's confidential by state law. And if we share it, the state won't make it available to us. So we get accumulated information through HDL, the consultant, on sales tax growth. They also work at making sure that Glendale gets all the sales tax revenues that we're supposed to get. So if a business has miscoded their location, HDL will track to make sure that our money doesn't go someplace else from a business here in Glendale. We can give you generalized information. Then Cone reviews our property tax revenues, and we get that usually an annual report.
We do. I think we get a
Twice a
quarterly,
year.
though.
That's more detailed, and we can share that detail with you, and that has to do with the largest property tax properties in the city and that sort of thing. We can certainly share that.
Isn't that already available on the internet? I thought I recall seeing that somewhere. The largest property tax.
It may be. I don't know.
In the city of Glendale, I thought it was.
What we put on the website in that regard.
Some of the real estate sites, I thought they were that was public already, including the sales tax information.
The generalized maybe.
No, it had the top 10, and then
Yeah.
Mr. Minuccian, I believe we've taken a summary of HDL's reports to us, and we've put it on our website. Looking at the staff, they're shaking their heads, so that may be where you saw it.
all right.
I think, Glendale.
So some of the information is available.
Yeah.
Not the detail, but
The
what is-
generalized stuff would be.
Right. Okay. Then, if I could get maybe a historical. To see where the sales tax has been over the past, let's say, 5 years, and where it is today, and the property taxes.
Provide you what we have. I think
Okay.
we generally track that.
This slide could take several hours. I won't do that to you, but
It's okay. Please take your time.
it is. These are the challenges that redevelopment looks at in the future, and we've spent a lot of time in the early part of the year talking about these. In January, the governor proposed eliminating redevelopment entirely, which would have made our sunset next year, actually this July. Currently, the plan that the redevelopment agency is operating under has a sunset in the central project area of 2015-16. And that is a date that we as staff keep in our mind as to make sure that we're able to button up all of the projects that you want to see accomplished within that time. There is some compromise legislation being talked about at the state level. Mr. Starbird alluded to it earlier. With the rush to get things, the tax extension on a June ballot, with that not panning out the way the governor had proposed, this whole issue is kind of settled down a bit. In fact, it did not make it out of one committee that it needed to, and so it's gone to a 2-year bill and probably won't be addressed until next year. If the legislation is adopted, the compromise legislation, it could provide for up to a 12-year extension, pushing our sunset date in the central project area out to 27-28. That has other implications in our cash flow that we will talk about more as we get more information on the compromise legislation. Another area that is a challenge for us is the capital improvement program and the number of projects that could potentially be funded with redevelopment funds and then having limited funds to do it. Which leads to the next is our cash flow. Just last year, the redevelopment agency would say we're not necessarily flush, but we did have significant resources to carry out the programs that you all wanted. Because of the elimination, the proposed elimination, and some of the strategies that we've taken on, we have increased our annual payout with debt service, the proposed compromise legislation, if it comes to pass, and then increasing the city's loan by about $10 million. Add to that the state's take over the last 2 years of $13.5 million, and it's a very different picture than it was before. We still believe, though, that we can do the things that you have asked and directed us. We will look out in the future and see how far we can go with that. I will say it's not so bad. Not everything is bad news, although it is for Mr. Tom. The increase in private development activity, we have seen a tick up in that. The economy is starting to move. Money seems to be loosening up, and developers that were poised to do something in 07, 08 have come back, as well as those property owners that have been sitting in the weeds waiting for things to turn around. So while we don't anticipate the significant amount of activity like a Disney or DreamWorks rebuild, we do see some movement in private development. That's for redevelopment. Before I turn over to Mr. Agani, if you have any questions on redevelopment, I'd be happy to answer them.
I will be quickly going over the work program for Economic Development Division and the Policy and Innovation Division before I hand it to Mr. Peter Zovak to go over the detailed housing review. The Economic Development Program has historically been a byproduct of the redevelopment activities. However, with the economy as it is and the combination of the different divisions under one department,
Before you go on, there's a slide, the Economic Development Division performance measures.
Yes. That's the one after this.
The one after it?
Yes. We will get to it after this slide.
Okay, I thought it was before. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
So with the current department program, economic development has fast taken the core and the central theme of the way that we're organizing the work program. We know that as the economy comes back, how ready we are to take advantage of the comeback of the economy is going to make a large difference, a huge difference in the way that we perform compared to other cities. The economic development program, something that has not happened before, but we are going to do now, is a long-range economic development strategic plan. We're about to start developing a long-range economic development strategic plan for the city, and we'll be sharing that information with you, that program with you as we start developing it. What has been ongoing is business attraction, retention, and expansion. For example, you might know that we have a liaison for all the car dealerships, and everything that they need, basically, that person holds their hand and gets them through the entire process with the city. We have a program strictly for retail and restaurant attraction to the city, and another one for industrial and office use attraction. We also have an ongoing business assistance program, as well as a citywide marketing and promotion program, and then we have a number of neighborhood business districts that are supported by our economic development program staff. Next slide, please. These are some of the measures that we've come up with, I believe, for the first time this year to start identifying some of the work that's done in the Economic Development Division. The new businesses that have been attracted this year will be 12 by the end of this year, and the businesses that have been retained that otherwise would probably not have been retained in Glendale were 6, and the existing businesses that have expanded as a result of the Economic Development Program have been 4. All of these together represent 929 jobs, and in addition to that, construction jobs that have been created temporarily are 490. So overall, about the 650 businesses have been contacted to achieve these results.
How do you contact businesses?
Well,
650 new businesses, 12? And
there are all sorts of things. We actually do a lot of cold calls now, aggressive set of cold calls. And
you contact them and tell them what?
We contact them and tell them about what's available in Glendale, the services that are available in the Economic Development Program, and the other the set of contacts are the ones who contact us for information, and we make sure that they get all the information they need and then some. As a way of understanding that this is a business-friendly city, and we have all sorts of programs to assist them in investing here.
And let me just add that because this economic development portion is fairly new to community development, I think that those numbers of businesses attracted will go up as the program continues. When I was chair of redevelopment last year, I spent a lot of time working with the Economic Development Office and reaching out to those businesses. And it's pretty incredible when you sit down and really think about what business you think is a good fit to Glendale and take the time to contact that business, how productive that can be. And there are still some businesses that I know have been reaching out to me in the last just few weeks, and I'm sure to you as well, that are, because of our outreach, very interested in Glendale. And some of these are fairly substantial businesses.
They are. And what they're noticing from our outreach is that this is a city that is not only interested in having them come over, but we're willing and with open arms. We do outreach, for example, for specific sites that are vacant in the city with specific businesses trying to match those with the brokers who represent those properties. That's a very, very customized kind of service.
Do you get the name of the new businesses that were actually...
Yes, we actually have those names, and we can provide them for you. I can... The business that you're talking about, the new businesses that have been attracted?
I mean, you have to read
like
them
Bevmo, Philly's Best, Gracie Barra, and then Technicolor Film Lab. These are some examples. We can give you the list later on. Yes. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that the Economic Development Division is facing and is gearing up for are the ongoing flat economy. We're hoping that it'll turn around, and we're getting ourselves ready for that, but we know that it continues to be somewhat flat. The high office vacancy rate continues, and we are getting competition from the surrounding communities. We are getting information about what other communities are doing in the immediate vicinity, and we want to be competitive and maybe ahead of them. We have identified and continue to identify legal and or code impediments to property readiness. What I mean by that is how fast we can turn around a property from one use to another use and from one business to another. There are a number of impediments, some of which are out of our control, and we are identifying those and coming up with programs to be proactively addressing those so that we can help businesses move into Glendale faster. We are doing some work on the citywide branding and promotion. We think we've only done some work there. There's lots more that we could do in the future, and that's what we'll be presenting to you next year. And then we're also looking at new funding sources for citywide economic development. As I said, historically, this has been an offshoot of the redevelopment function, and it has only focused on redevelopment areas. But we have businesses outside the redevelopment areas, and we are thinking of ways to produce some funding sources to assist our businesses outside the redevelopment areas. Next slide, please. This is a Policy and Innovation Division. This is a brand new division that we created, which consists of Mr. Tatavosian, who is uniquely qualified to understand the different aspects of not only our own department, but the departments elsewhere, the other departments, and how the work program of all of the departments together can impede, again, on the work program of our department and the attraction of investment and businesses to Glendale. These are some of the examples of the assignments that we have created for this division. For example, framework for development policy formation. To give you an example of that, we have one of the major hospitals in the city has come up with an application for a substantial code amendment to give them permits to do certain things to improve the hospital. We think instead of just responding to that hospital, there's a way to address what this hospital is requesting that will benefit all of our healthcare-based industries and the rest of the hospitals in the city. So as a result, Mr. Tatavosian is putting together a team from the department to see how we could expand the benefits that resulted from this code amendment to benefit all of our healthcare-based industries in the city. The development process streamlining, for example, is something that we have just implemented a development review committee that consists of not only people in our own department, but from other departments that have anything to say about every project that comes to Glendale. The second an application is coming in, we're getting together with these departments, getting their feedback, so we prepare ourselves to streamline the process, the application process as we go forward. There are a number of redundancies that we're identifying within the department and within each division, and this division is responsible for identifying those redundancies and come up with recommendations on how to eliminate them. Which will ultimately result in long-term efficiency recommendations that will change the work program. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentations on those two divisions, and Mr. Zovak is going to give you the detailed presentation on the Housing Authority's work program.
So Mr. Mincy and Ms. Parazian can sit up and pay attention now. And thank you both for sticking with us all day.
Okay. Mayor Friedman, Chair Quintero, members of the City Council and Housing Authority. Very quickly, an overview of the Housing Authority's mission statement is to improve the quality of life in Glendale by providing affordable housing through new development, acquisition, and or rehabilitation of existing housing stock, and indirect financial assistance. And those translate into core services, and those core services within the Housing Division consist of housing assistance, otherwise known as the Section 8 program, housing development, acquisition, rehabilitation. In terms of housing development, that's meant as new construction. Acquisition is meant as the acquisition of existing units and slating them for affordable housing. Preservation would be the rehabilitation of existing units that have already been designated as being occupied by occupants who meet affordable housing income requirements. There's also ongoing program administration, and there's federal and state reporting and monitoring requirements. In terms of our performance measures for 2010-11, under the Section 8 program, a total of approximately 4,500 housing units that had been inspected in preparation for a Section 8 contract with a landlord. Approximately 3,000 households that have been assisted under the Section 8 program. That's the program that consists of Glendale's authorized vouchers directly through HUD, as well as portable vouchers that come in through other housing agencies. Approximately 1,200 property owners participate and are in contract with the Housing Authority under the Section 8 program, and annually approximately $25.2 million distributed in housing assistance payments on behalf of the qualified tenants. Under housing development and preservation, we've completed 70 new units. That would be the Vassar City Lights project that completed in December. Initiated and are in development of 62 units. That would be the 57 units at the Doran Gardens townhouse moderate income housing project, and 5 units over at the Habitat Geneva site. 40 units rehabilitated under the single-family and multifamily rehabilitation program, and 44 households assisted under our various rental and employment assistance programs.
Mr. Zovak, what is the list of people who are on a waiting list for the Section 8? Do you know how many number of people who are left? Section I would think that the Section 8 the program is still closed in terms of new applicants.
Correct.
What is the waiting list?
Approximately 5,700 applicants still on the waiting list.
Okay.
We are following up on a request that you had put in, I believe, at your first meeting. We were scheduled to have a discussion on the waiting list. I believe it's May 31st.
Thank you.
And with that, segueing into the Section 8 program, in terms of anticipated revenues for the upcoming fiscal year and how they compare, under the voucher program, as I had mentioned earlier, 2 programs that we administer, direct vouchers given to us through HUD, and then portable vouchers of applicants who are coming into Glendale but are actually vouchers issued by other agencies. The Glendale Direct Voucher Program, we're anticipating $13.8 million in revenue. It represents an increase of approximately $1.3 million. Just a caution, though, that doesn't mean that there will be an ability to increase the number of vouchers that are utilized with this $1.3 million. What it simply means is that we anticipate needing approximately $13.8 million in revenue to pay for the expenses that we have projected for this coming fiscal year. HUD has not always provided the revenue needed to match the expenses that are being incurred on the program. So in this particular case, we see a need for revenues of $13.8 million. That revenue need will either be made up completely by HUD, or there'll be a gap that would have to be made up by Section 8 reserves.
Peter, you might touch on for a second how that can happen, such as the difference between rents and potentially falling income and where that increased cost comes in.
Right, and that's another discussion we're having on May 24th, where we were providing you an update on the budget, Section 8 budget. What's been impacting the budget, and we'll see it in a later slide, for Section 8 has been the economy. Weak economy has translated into declining incomes for working families on the program and declining incomes for seniors on the program. Particularly Social Security disability has been decreased in the past 2 years. Payments being made through the IHSS program have been decreased and reduced. As a result, tenants are coming in immediately when their incomes are being affected, noting to us that their income has gone down, and as a result, our housing assistance payment has had to go up to compensate for that gap. And so we have been seeing over the last 2 to 3 years
the existing
clients that are already on the program, correct?
Right. There are the subsidies going up to the existing tenants.
Correct.
And because rents aren't coming down.
Right.
So rents stay where they are, but income goes down.
But I thought rents did come down.
There's been a slight stabilization of rents within the last 6-7 months, but it does not make up for the decrease in incomes that we've been seeing. So it hasn't really offset it. It's helped. Otherwise, those gaps would be even larger.
Najarian?
We have a report, Peter, about a year ago that the subsidy from HUD for Section 8 was going down.
Correct.
And we were how you're showing it's going up though.
We're showing that expenses are anticipated to go up, and as a result, we're going to need revenues to cover approximately $13.8 million in expenses. Doesn't necessarily mean that 13.8 is coming from HUD. It will either come from HUD or it will be HUD and a combination of us having to make up that gap through our Section 8 reserves.
So you just plug it into the budget then?
We have to. And the other component and difficulty in dealing with the Section 8 program, it's a HUD program, but it is provided and allocated on a calendar year basis. So every year we're budgeting for this program, not knowing what the second 6 months of the fiscal year numbers will be. We can only project. And the projections have been very difficult to do over the last few years because HUD has been so uncertain in what they're providing. Just recently, the 2011 HUD budget has been settled. We have yet to hear from HUD what that's going to be. We anticipate between now and the end of the fiscal year, we might have some money reductions in the current year program we're dealing with, which we'll have to then go back and appropriate money to make up for that. I mean, we were on the verge, on the eve of a government shutdown, which would have greatly affected the Section 8 program. So it's been very difficult to predict.
And we have a follow-up session on this one, did you say?
For budget purposes, that's scheduled for May 24th. For the Section 8 wait list program and update and discussion on that is scheduled for May 31st.
I won't be here for the 24th, but if you can get me the materials, I'll be sure to.
We are, just so that you know in advance, we will be providing an update on the funding for this fiscal year and requesting a resolution of appropriation from our Section 8 reserve fund to make up for the gap that we anticipate having in this fiscal year and will need to complete out June.
Fortunately, we think we'll have adequate reserves to cover the gap in the upcoming year.
Otherwise, what would we do if we didn't have reserves? Are we obligated?
If we didn't
to
have
make
reserves, if we didn't have reserves, as some agencies do not have, we would have to come up with a plan, have it adopted by the Housing Authority, put it in our administrative plan, had HUD review it and approve it, to come up with ways to, if we haven't already implemented cost-saving measures, which we have in a number of different ways. Every way that we've found, we've already implemented that. The last resort is terminations of participants, and we would have to come up with a hierarchy of who to terminate first, why, and reasons for that.
That would be terrible, I'll tell you.
That would be terrible.
It would be.
Yeah, that'd be terrible.
How much is the Section 8 reserve?
There are two pots of money that are considered Section 8 reserves. We receive two pots of money from HUD. The funding that is directly provided as housing assistance payments to landlords on behalf of tenants, approximately $3.5 million in HAP reserve. We're also paid an administrative fee monthly to administer these vouchers. And I take that back. Let me switch those around.
The other way around.
Approximately $500,000 in HAP reserves, correct? And approximately $3.5 million in admin reserves. HAP reserves can only be used to assist housing assistance payments. Admin reserves must be used for admin, or it can be used to make up the HAP gap as well.
And how long did it take to build up those reserves? Is
Years.
that something? Years.
Years.
And that's not a lot of money
Years.
compared to
And
the
actually,
budget.
HUD came in a few years ago and took the housing assistance reserve, built up a sizable one there, and they needed, if I recall, they needed funds.
Correct.
Came in and took
Correct.
those reserves.
1 year, then HUD came back and said, we're not reducing your funding, but let's say the number was $2 million, but we're only giving you 1.5, and you can use $500,000 from your HAP reserve. And they called that not a reduction. So they were when they started to get to looking for innovative ways to find funding for their budget, then they started to identify reserves. And so the first reserves they began to tap into has been agencies' HAP reserves. Haven't yet hit admin reserves, but I'm sure if the situation gets more desperate, they'll start to look at that. And as I said before, not every agency has these reserves. So the admin fee, and let me just say one thing. Purpose of the reserves. They would be utilized in times where we have a gap in funding and we need to make that gap up. It would also be utilized, and it's currently being utilized on a monthly basis. We put out approximately $25.2 million in payments to landlords on an annual basis, about $2 million monthly. That $2 million is generated and paid out of our reserves and then reimbursed by HUD. So we don't use necessarily general fund money to front these payments. They're used out of our reserves. In the event of a government shutdown, as we almost had, that 3.5 plus 500, that $4 million would have been good for about 2 months' worth of payments, and then we would have been stuck.
One more question. Do we also have to cover the 1,500 ported vouchers also, or is that just our 1,500 that we...
No. On a monthly basis, we cover our vouchers as well as the ports.
As well as
vouchers get reimbursed by HUD. The ports get reimbursed by the agencies that we are administering for, a majority of which are...
So L.A. would have to reimburse us...
Correct.
To fill that gap for their 1,500. Okay, thank you.
So during the shutdown, we had called them and asked them, or the eve of the shutdown, what is your hierarchy of who you'll be paying out of your reserves? Will the ports be your major concern? They had indicated it would for the first month. If it stretched longer than that, they didn't know. So there's a need to have the reserve for situations like this that we're talking about, but there's a balance that we have to try to achieve, and we don't know yet with the budgets as to where we would be and how we might want to utilize these reserves now.
In this case, though, you could pretty well exhaust what is a relatively small reserve in a year.
Correct. For this budget resolution coming up in 2 weeks, we're going to be appropriating $600,000 from the reserves to make up for the current year gap that HUD did not cover.
And are we still, I know that the enrollment is closed, but are we still pulling people from the waiting list and putting them in section, providing them in
No,
section?
consistent with an update that was provided to the Housing Authority about a little over a year ago, we are trying to reduce our vouchers through attrition so that our expenses on our vouchers try to equal our revenue that we're receiving. Problem is that the revenue numbers keep moving, mostly down, and the HAP expenses keep coming up. So it takes a long time to try and steer this ship around. So we haven't been taking anyone off the waiting list for the last year. We're also estimating on the admin fees of $1.6 million. Interest revenue, a slight increase in that number. Miscellaneous revenue of $38,000. Portable voucher fee administration. As I said, that on behalf of the other agencies that we administer the portables, we receive both a voucher reimbursement on the admin and a reimbursement on the HAP. The admin, our admin fee is 100% of HUD's estimation. When we administer a voucher on a portable basis, we only get to receive 80% of that admin fee. The originating agency keeps 20%. So a little bit of a discount that's being provided to administer a port.
Peter, anticipating that a lot of the portables are City of LA, are they pretty good at reimbursing us for their costs?
They've gotten better. We've had a number of meetings with them over the last 5 years. We've had discussions with them as to what we felt our outstanding reconciliation number has been with them. And we've slowly whittled that number down to approximately $100,000 to $200,000 at any one time. We think they owe us. They feel they don't owe us. It's required a lot of cooperation with them, and they have been very supportive in the last few years. And another, you see an identical number to the voucher program for the portable program. Something really unique in the case of the Glendale Housing Authority. We have a voucher program, a portable program that's almost equal to the vouchers that we've been allocated by HUD. We have approximately 1,592 vouchers allocated. We have approximately 1,536 vouchers in activity, meaning issued and being utilized.
The numbers are exactly the same, though.
Exactly. We anticipate that in this coming fiscal year, we'll have a portable program that equals our voucher program. And according to HUD, there's only a few cities, agencies in the country that have that problem. We've been lobbying with HUD to try and determine whether or not they would just see a number that large and trying to demonstrate to HUD the impacts that this large portable program has.
They should just allocate those vouchers to the city of Glendale, because we have...
Like I said, we had discussions with HUD where we've been trying to demonstrate that the impact is so difficult and large on an agency to administer this number of vouchers. We've been asking HUD as to whether or not they would convert it to actual Glendale vouchers.
The lion's share is City of LA? The lion's share is City of LA?
Oh, yes. I'd say nearly 90% of the...
And does LA keep a piece of the administrative money?
20%. So far, HUD has said no, that they've never done that. They've asked us to continue working with the City of Los Angeles Housing Authority in trying to come up with...
As the portable vouchers, as people come off, or in many cases for seniors as they die, LA is no longer... Those go back to the City of LA, right? So in time, you'd expect those 1,500 to begin to diminish?
Yes, as portable vouchers are, and I'm looking at staff just to make sure, as portable vouchers are turned in, they resort back and are given back to the originating agency.
As I recall, we picked up a lot of those in the days when LA was behind in its utilization numbers, and they removed the one-year residency requirement for portability. So we picked up a lot of those at that time, and actually helped bail out LA, making their numbers look much better, because they were getting in trouble by HUD at the time, if I recall.
Lease-up rates were low on their side.
Very, very low.
And we continue to get about 9 to 10 portables a month being brought over to Glendale. Housing development preservation revenues, slight increase in redevelopment set-aside funds being generated as a result of the 2 redevelopment project areas. Slight decrease, lower interest rates in the interest revenue. Our annual home, speaking of HUD and funding, our annual home grant award, we were made aware of what that funding amount is for the coming fiscal year. We were reduced to approximately $278,000 in home funds. In terms of revenues, we will be required to appropriate approximately $85,000 from our home admin reserve. It's another reserve fund that we have acquired over time and built up as a result of efficient operations of the administration portion of home. Home has a cap on admin of their awards. It's 10% of the annual home award. And approximately $250,000 in expected program income.
What kind of programming?
Most of that program income is generated through redevelopment set-aside activities, and they represent a large portion
Sorry,
of
what kind of activities?
redevelopment set-aside fund activities, and a large portion of that represents payments that are being made on the Housing Authority's outstanding loan portfolio for its first-time homebuyer program. It's been in operation for approximately the last 15 years. Some of the housing programs and projects funded, there's $1.2 million in code compliance augmentation that was discussed earlier, approximately $1 million in housing rehabilitation, that's both for single-family and multifamily, $2 million projected for new construction and/or acquisition and acquisition rehab activities. There's a $50,000 a year annual support of Path Achieve, Glendale. And then again, there's approximately $475,000 allocated to the various special rental assistance programs that are operated by the Housing Authority. And they're listed there: Vet Wrap, Life Wrap program, Moving Assistance Grants, and Emergency Rental Assistance program. In terms of professional services for the Housing Division, 2 legal services, Kane, Balmer, and Berkman, and Burke, Williams, Sorensen. Those pretty much relate to the housing development and preservation deals that are put into place. Financial services, 2 firms there, Tierra West Advisors and Kaiser Marston Associates. We contract with a number of different lending services for the different programs that we operate. The Housing Authority is a lender through some of its programs. In doing that, we are required to order credit reports under certain programs, so we contract with Certified Credit Link for credit reporting. With regards to the first-time homebuyer program and program income that I mentioned earlier, we contract with Community Reinvestment Fund. They are charged with billing and receipting of the first-time homebuyer loan payment proceeds and then transmitting those to the City of Glendale. Again, as we are a lender, we are concerned about title reports, title insurance on some of our loans, and we contract with Old Republic Title to achieve those goals. We also deal with an organization called ClearPoint Solutions, which provides home ownership education, counseling through a number of first-time homebuyer seminars that we conduct for residents of the city. In terms of data services, we use a company called AccuRent to run our criminal background checks for our Section 8 program. Emphasis Elite is a Section 8 software program that interacts with HUD. LexisNexis is an investigative database that we utilize for our fraud investigations. We do have some fair housing obligations, considering that we are receiving HUD funds. One of those obligations have to do with Section 504 compliance, accessibility compliance, and we conduct training with Nan McKay and Associates to do that. We have a contract with the Housing Rights Center. It is a contract that is administered by CDBG, but 2 pots of HUD funding help pay for that. CDBG, and then on the housing side, Section 8 and Home pay for a portion of that contract. And then for our Section 8 program, we employ a hearing officer to weigh in on any disputes that particular tenants might have with regards to rulings, and that person is Joan Clay Manley.
Can you provide dollar amounts for the last year for these services?
Right, we will. These are the salary expenses anticipated for the Section 8 program, approximately $1.6 million in salaries, a small budgeted number of $89,000 for hourly wages, no overtime, the standard PERS and benefits calculations, and M&O of approximately $28.1 million. The bulk of that represents the housing assistance payments that we make. It is qualified as direct assistance, and it falls under an M&O category. Housing Development Funds, Fund 203, which is the home funds, and Funds 242, which is the redevelopment set-aside funds. Salaries of approximately $1.6 million. A little bit smaller hourly wages, $37,000 estimated. again, the PERS and benefits contributions, and approximately $8.2 million for M&O, and that has, if you note the asterisk there, it was revised prior to some of you receiving your electronic copies of your PowerPoint, and it was revised to reflect 2 loan payments that are made out of the redevelopment set-aside funds, approximately $3.1 million to Union Bank for the Vassar City Lights project, and approximately $700,000 in bond proceeds repayment associated with those 2 funds mentioned at the very end at the top, 307 and 309, the recently issued tax increment bond. Challenges in the future outlook for the housing assistance. We did talk about this. Weak economy, declining incomes equals increased HAP payments for the program. HUD funding looks to be insufficient funding to support the declining incomes. Agencies are going to be looking at depleting their reserves and possibly reduced earned administrative fees in the future. Another challenge has been and will continue to be the administration of the portable voucher program, $1,485. And as we had discussed earlier, portable HAPs are paid from our housing reserves, then reimbursed by those agencies. There's an ongoing reconciliation of both the HAP and the admin fees that are earned and paid. And then in simply administering a port voucher, we are incurring a reduced admin fee for that port. On the housing development preservation side, as discussed today as well, the future of redevelopment funding, which will impact the housing funds. We do have some caps. Some programs do have caps on administration. As I mentioned earlier, the home program does have a 10% cap. There are, in answer to or in response to the threat to redevelopment funding at the state level, there are some compromises and reform measures that are out there. One specifically calls for the elimination of funding code enforcement with housing set-aside funds. We currently fund code enforcement under the code compliance augmentation to the amount of $1.2 million. Decreased federal funding, limited land suitable for affordable housing. The demand and need for affordable housing continues to remain high. We do have 2 debt obligations that we are paying on, both the bond and the Union Bank loan. And then there are legal issues associated with all of those items above, as well as some recent projects that have required some outside counsel to assist in some legal measures that the Housing Authority is looking at. Any more? And I'll turn it back over to Hassan Haghani to wrap the discussion up.
Thank you, Peter. Now, going back to the general fund parts of the budget, we heard questions about what criteria staff used for the previous department as to how to define what's essential and what's priority and what's discretionary. Next slide, please. What we have used, these are the criteria we use to identify the 3 different categories. And one, of course, as you heard, every division has a series of legal requirements to meet. So that was part of what we took into account. And what previously the City Council or the Housing Authority or this agency have identified as priority, we have continued identifying as priority. And then in some regards, the articulated community demands. For example, the demand to change the design review process, which required code amendments, to us was one way to identify that that's a priority in terms of what the community asked and what the council asked us to do. The same would go for wireless communication. Rate of community participation and inquiries and service usage. We know where the community is taking advantage of what we provide the most, and that's part of what we took into account. And then what will increase and impact our internal ability to respond to changing demands and changing direction that comes from the dais. We took that into account in identifying what's essential, priority, and discretionary. In terms of the essential parts of the general fund budget, a portion of our department, in neighborhood services, centralized customer service continues to be an essential part. Citizen engagement and involvement, is important because, and it's essential because it really does prevent a lot of code violation that would cost us a lot more to respond to in the long term. And code enforcement obviously is one of the first things people expect neighborhood services to deliver, and code enforcement support. Community support outreach programs, which is basically fundraising to fund parts of what code neighborhood services does, is also considered essential for us. In planning administration is essential. We do a lot of legally mandated administration that need to happen. Historic preservation is essential, and process development applications, which is where the public comes to us right from the get-go. Staff permits, to be able to staff permit services center to respond to people as they are there, and then the update of the general plan is essential because it's mandated by state law. In building and safety, you'll see two of these categories have 1 and 2. Administrative services for permit service center. The building and safety has a set of core functions related to permit services, and then a set of ancillary functions that are meant to help the customers to have one-stop permit center. So we've separated those two pieces. And then the field inspection as well. There are a number of field inspection services that building safety has to perform by necessity, but then since they're there, they're also doing some other things, and those are ancillary. Plan check and engineering service. A number of the plan check and engineering service done is directly related to building and safety services, and those are essential. What we have under economic development, this is separate from the economic development program that's funded through redevelopment funds. This is just a $10,000 funding that we have set aside for quick turnaround things that we are asked to do during the year. For example, recently we were asked to do a quick assessment of the cost of the property that the court wants to take over to expand the courthouse, and we were able to tap into this fund to do the appraisal. Next slide, please. These ones are the services from the 3 divisions that we consider a priority. Code, education, and counseling. Again, we prevent a lot of legal action by doing this part of the service. E-requests are only increasing in numbers. They're not decreasing, and we think we need to continue providing them. Legal. In neighborhood services, we have...
E-request?
That's online requests for services that.
Oh, as opposed to you separate that out from people who walk into.
Who call and walk in, etc. And planning, the legal function that we have here, we have a staff attorney that works with neighborhood services to sort through all of the different aspects of every code compliance case that we have. This is an important part of our work. It helps us to determine how much action, what levels of action we need to take every time we have a code violation case. It is what we consider priority, and that's why it's included here. With planning, zoning code changes, which is part of the policy program, we think it's priority because of the amount of demand that we get for that, and it also contributes to our ability to be nimble to respond to your policy direction changes. However, is it essential? Probably not. Could we live with an outdated code? We could. But we think the ability to change the code is part of what you need as a priority. With building and safety, like I said, these categories have ancillary segments. Field inspection services, there are some of the parts of the inspections that are done simply because the inspectors are there and there's economies of scale, and that we can take advantage of their presence there to respond to some field inquiries. And the same goes with administrative services at the permit center, which basically we administer a lot of the work that are related to other departments or other divisions simply to help the customers who are there at the moment. And the plan check and engineering service is the same. Parts of what we do there are associated with other departments but helps the customer. That's why we consider them priority. Next, please. That really, the only program that's remaining that's neither priority nor essential is the rental housing inspection program. And this figure only represents 15% of the cost of that program that's funded by the general fund. The rest of it is funded by set-aside funding, and which Peter Zobak addressed a few minutes ago. So this portion of it is funded through the general plan, through the general fund.
And is this the program that the consultants were recommending?
That the consultant is recommending that we actually make mandatory, as many cities have done, and make it a fee-based program. We'll get into some numbers of what that might mean in terms of revenues for the city. So to summarize all these figures, the combination of essential priority and discretionary of the general fund portion is just about $9.2 million. And if you take out the discretionary piece, that's just a little bit over $73,000. But in order to meet the city's budget shortfall projections, we are also recommending to tap into the priority program, namely the zoning code update program in the planning division, which would mean the reduction of planning staff by one full-time filled position at this moment as a way of participating in the budget reductions. So the total proposed as such would be $177,000, a little bit over that, and it represents 1.65 filled full-time equivalent positions. I must say that the one of that number is going to be in the planning division, which would be a full-time staff. The 0.65 in the neighborhood services, we have learned that somebody is leaving. We think there's a vacancy that we could use to address the neighborhood services program reduction. Next slide, please. So again, this summarizes what I just went over. We're not proposing any hourly part-time reductions. We have, over the last 2 to 3 years, they relied a lot on hourly staff who usually work part-time to backfill what would otherwise be done by full-time staff, and that has saved us a lot of money. And the hourly staff relatively cost us very little to fund. Next, please. What it would mean if you were to implement these reductions, that are the community or council requests for code amendments would not be done as frequently and as quickly as we have been doing them so far. That means we would have to wait a little bit longer each time we would come up with updates that you request that we do. And without the second part, without an adoption of a fee-based, and this is important to identify, we are actually proposing adoption of a fee-based rental housing inspection program. And if you choose not to do that, inspections will occur less frequently, and the possible decline of rental housing quality. And if the remainder of the funding for that program gets eliminated through the actions in Sacramento, then the program would completely be eliminated. Next slide, please. So again, this summarizes this is basically a repeat of the first slide we showed you, which separates the general fund portion and the agency and housing fund portions and the other funding portions that we have, and our proposed reductions would be what the number you see at the very bottom. Next slide, please. We wanted to discuss a little bit of the presentation that Wildan did this morning to you. We do think that there are a number of the fees that Wildan has studied that we would recommend for adjustments, and we would be prepared to give those. We weren't prepared to give them to finance today, but we will be able to give a fee-by-fee recommendation based on Wildan's proposal. So that we get closer to actual costs in some cases, and some cases maybe not as close, but still recoup some of the actual costs. And there is a different way we're looking at the fees to differentiate by type and scope of the way that we do our services. So in terms of proposing fees, we think there are unbilled services that we need to propose fees for. For example, the ongoing general plan and zoning code update is one example that we don't charge anyone for those, but they're an ongoing expense. And then potential new services. The point of sale inspections that's being proposed for neighborhood services is one way to address a number of issues, including ongoing code compliance problems with existing properties where they have not been resolved, and also as a way of generating revenue to offset some of the cost of code enforcement. And mandatory rental housing inspections, as I mentioned, and administrative citations. That, as Sam Engel mentioned earlier, this is a brand new topic for us, and we are really ready to tackle this if the council would like us to. There are two surcharges that Wildan identified today. I'd like to stress them again. We already have a technology surcharge. Obviously, we're charging a lot less than what it costs us to provide the technology service that we need, and the community, as some of you may remember, is now starting to ask us to expand our services online, and for us to only maintain the technology we have, Wildan has proposed a technology surcharge. And then the other part is the policy surcharge, a surcharge that could pay for part of the cost of code amendments and general plan amendments. As they have proposed it, a 3% surcharge would pay 10% of the actual cost to the city to provide those two functions. Next slide, please. So in proposing our fees, we are looking, we just wanted to give you a general sense of what we're looking at. For example, we're looking at CUP processing fee for hillside homes. What's left in the city of Glendale to develop is usually what was previously unbuildable on the hillsides, or it's infill redevelopment of existing sites. When we're dealing with hillsides, the CUP processing is really an involved process because every case is much more complicated than the cases we were used to, say, 5 or 10 years ago. The DRB fees for homes over 3,500 square feet, that's the line of demarcation that we see a lot more work goes in a DRB process when a single family home is larger than size, and we think it's justified to actually have two different fees, the design review fees for the size of the project. And of course, one thing that has been suggested is express design review service. Many people complain that our design review process is very involved and takes too long. And it has been suggested that we offer, similar to what building and safety offers for express plan check, express design review. I must say that the current design studio staff would not be able to manage this workload. If we were to charge express design review service 2.5 times of the cost of the regular permit, that would probably just pay to add another senior urban designer to meet that demand. We think there is a demand for it. We don't think it'll contribute to the existing cost, but it will provide an additional service.
Let me say that I've had, as you know, requests for this, and from architects and developers who've said they'd be more than willing to pay that extra fee to get through the process faster. And if we can do that and it's a wash with getting a new person, and I don't know that it is, but if it is, it might serve multiple benefits. So I'd like at some point more elaboration on what the cost would be and what we really think we could recover.
We'd be ready to give you that detail. And then with Building and Safety Division, Mr. Tom has identified certain areas where the fees could be increased to get, again, closer to full cost recovery. They're over there. If you'd like to ask any questions about any of those, Mr. Tom can answer those questions. Next slide. With regard to neighborhood services, this is the only place where we actually have some estimated numbers, and we thought they would be worth going over. The administrative citations, based on our staff's estimates, would generate up to $165,000 annually if they were to implement it for next year. And to just implement the cost recovery on the fees that we already have in place, some of the fees we have in place in neighborhood services, to implement some adjustments alone would add another $20,000 worth of revenues. The third number is the one that we corrected since the slides were sent to you, and we would like to highlight that. What you were given is to implement the fee-based rental inspections. On the original slide, it said it would generate $1.2 million. We would like to say that's the cost of the program, but in our estimates, as you see at the bottom under the asterisk, staff's estimates are that if you were to implement that, we could recoup $865,000 annually. And the point of sale inspections, in our estimates, could generate annually $265,000. Next slide. So these are the long-term strategies. By long-term, we mean within 2 years from now. There are some, in addition to the short-term strategies we gave you, we're looking at these strategies that take some time to develop, and some of them will be contingent upon all of us being under one roof, which we are not right now. So new fees, we think we should always come up with new fees for new services. So as a strategy, our department will be presenting to you a way to create new fees every time new services are asked of us to do, and a justification for it. And we think there are economies of scale to be taken advantage of. For example, in the customer service program that we have in 3 different divisions of building and safety, housing, and neighborhood services, we think if we are co-locating, there are some economies of scale to be benefited by combining some of those programs on a rotational basis that could be achieved over the long term. And the recovers, again, going back to the surcharges to recover the cost for long-range planning and recover the cost, we think there might be new ways to look into recovering additional, generating additional revenues to pay for code compliance as the funding seems to be drying up. Licensing is an area that we've been in discussion with the city clerk's office about transferring some of the licensing that's done by the city clerks to the community development department under neighborhood services, and we have already introduced some licensing programs in the downtown for the downtown entertainment district. We think licensing provides some opportunities to actually recoup some of the cost of administration and maybe some revenues in the long term. Express design review, which we discussed, and also as part of our long-term economic development strategy, we're focusing a lot on city promotion and new ways of tourism and revenue opportunities. Next, please. This concludes our slide presentation. Thank you very much for bearing with us over this long presentation. Do you have any questions?
I have one card. Mr. Milano, you weren't here for most of the presentation. Did you still want to speak? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mayor Friedman, members of the City Council, Housing Authority, and Redevelopment Agency. My name is Herbert Molano. I did have the opportunity to go through many of the slides, so even though I wasn't here for the whole presentation, and I only have a couple of minutes, I want to highlight only a few things that I thought would be pertinent for your consideration. Here is a particular unit of the city or a department that deals with activity-based type budgeting, meaning that their activity is impacted both by the economy and by agency and city council initiatives. As such, then, when I look at slide number 17 and slide number 21, both of them are giving you sort of like the seeds for which you can continue to evaluate performance measures from year to year. And as Councilman Manukian mentioned earlier, it would be a great idea to have a range of activity as it transpired during the past 10 years or 5 years. Because, as you all know, the activities of many of these departments and units depend heavily on new homes that are being built, number of apartment units being built, commercial and retail development, and office building commercial activity. And as the economy improves, then, of course, their activity and their budget would increase accordingly. It'll be nice to see how full-time equivalents match on year to year against this type of activity so that you can get a sense of whether or not there are efficiencies being implemented in the department. But what concerns to me is that if you were to bring up slide number 15, if I may address that, is that as you are asked to make decisions on a lot of the minutia of the department's performance, at the end of the day, if you take a look at benefits, from $894,000 to $1,000,003, that's a 53% in benefit improvements, while you have less than a fraction of 1% with regard to the salary increases. And that, to me, is where the tires meet the road. All of your decisions that you've discussed today are based upon that hit on all the departments with regard to the benefits. If you don't address that head on, then the havoc that it's going to create not only in your departments, but as well as with the public. Those individuals who want to improve their homes, do all kinds of additional repair activity, are going to be faced with maybe postponing it or see what they do if they don't have the fees that are now being increased to get those projects moving. And those projects build jobs. So I'm suggesting that the city look back at those particular benefits and address them head on. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
I do have a question. Hassan, you were going really, really fast towards the end there.
Okay, I will be happy to repeat everything slowly.
I thought you were channeling Scott Howard in one of his more active moments.
I was concerned that you will not get a break before your 6 o'clock
I appreciate that. I don't want to get too long. We've got a meeting starting soon. The point of sale issue is a pretty big policy issue which we haven't yet touched on.
Correct.
So I just want to make that clear. Anyone who's looking at this, there's a lot of interested parties who want to have some input and discussion. So just because you've put it in and plugged in a number doesn't mean that it's a done deal and that we're even started discussing it at our council level.
No, I'd like to emphasize that all that means is that staff is bringing that to your attention for discussion, and these are some ways to address that.
I'd apply the same thing on everything on that list, as well as the various fees, which all would have to come back to you again. So,
okay.
I know there'll be a lot of discussion about both that point of sale as well as what we call previous time a systematic code enforcement program. That would all need to come back to you.
Any other questions?
I would like to make just a very quick comment. Mr. Milano touched on a number that I honed in on very quickly, and I asked Bob to look at that benefits number and its increase, because it's inconsistent from department to department in terms of the percentage increase. This one just seems very high, and I want to dig deeper to find out what's driving that.
If I may, Madam Mayor, I just would like to thank the entire budget team that put this together. Particularly, I'd like to thank Elena Bolbolian and Stephen Kosis, who worked to coordinate between all the different divisions. And Mr. Lanzafame, as much as he tries to be humble, he actually came with Elena on Saturday to put together a lot of slides and information that I just wanted to thank them publicly.
Yes, thanks to staff. I just want to announce that we're going to begin the council meeting at 6:15, so we have a bit of a break. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn for council.
Second.
Our motion for redevelopment.
Let's adjourn.
Second.
Second.
To adjourn housing.
Housing to adjourn.